This is kind of short and lighthearted, but still an odd thing I saw while on the extraterrestrial highway in Nevada. When I was in high school, my parents and I would take trips to Vegas during spring break. It was fun, and I would always look forward to them. One year, we drove the whole way from Oregon to Vegas, making little stops along the way to visit many different places. One day of the trip, we were on the extraterrestrial highway, making our way down to Vegas. Being 15 and into the paranormal and weird stuff, I thought it was a cool experience. As we're driving, I notice a white van with government plates. I looked to see who was driving the van, and I shit you not, it was two guys in black suits with sunglasses. They even had earpieces. I was thinking, no fucking way, this is hilarious and a bit coincidental. I stuck my arm out the window to wave at them, but they didn't wave back. I kept looking at them until they took a turn onto some dirt road that led out into the middle of the desert. It was just an odd experience. It's easily explainable, but still a bit odd and very coincidental. I just wanted to share this. Thanks for listening. In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old, broke, and jobless in Mexico City. My entire life had gone steadily down the drain for the past couple of years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when an online friend I had met in person 2 years before invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get a pretty sweet holiday in a country I always wanted to visit. I have no problem doing labor work, and in fact I was looking forward to doing it and getting my body back into real action. Since I moved back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I had been feeling rusted and soft, so I packed my suitcase, put on my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting pissed drunk. I arrived to Stavanger in Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead, so after an hour filling the reports and giving the address of my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him again, my friend Harold. He was standing there, confused and annoyed. He told me later he was about to leave the airport, thinking I had decided not to take the flight after all. I guess I was lucky. That night, I spent it with Harold and his friends in an oceanfront apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger. We were getting drunk on Norwegian beer and smoking hash. Disgusting shit if you ask me. I prefer the real thing. But anyway, I felt welcomed and content. The next day, Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse about an hour south of Stavanger in a community called Egersund. At least I think that's the name of the place I was in. Norwegian names and addresses are weird if you're not familiar with them. The land Harold owned was huge and beautiful. I'm not really sure how it all works, but on his property there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was small. It was located on top of a hill with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in the 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced at the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the window was covered by boxes and papers, but I decided not to mention it since Harold didn't seem to care. I just assumed the guy was an eccentric man. Or maybe it was just a normal precaution, considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with the neighboring houses separated by big fields. I just took my mind out of it and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After being put up in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that week that Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus the house would be filled with the bride's family from Bergen, I think. In general, it was great to meet them, but on my second night, when everybody had gone to sleep and Harold and I were still up chatting, drinking beer, I got to meet the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been having some troubles with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech-savvy and had indeed been the one purchasing the phone for Harold. We went downstairs to Olaf's basement. Now, Harold kept telling me he didn't like Olaf and was actually pretty upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement, but for what I understood, they had some kind of relationship more than just landlord and tenant. The basement was dark, all the windows covered, and piles of junk cluttered the entire place. The bedroom was full of computer parts and electronic junk he had blinking and beeping. Olaf invited us to sit down, and when he turned on a desk lamp to check Harold's phone, I got the first real good look of him. He was in his mid-40s but looked older, shaved head, really skinny, big nose and deep shadows under his eyes. He had the entire look of a meth addict. I should know since I worked in a recovery house in Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. I had seen the same face back then in people who were dealing with severe addictions. The way he stuttered only confirmed further my observations, and I decided I had to keep an eye on him. My gut told me right then and there he was trouble. Olaf finished with Harold's phone and then directed his attention toward me. He asked me if I wanted to see some explicit material, to which I declined entirely. I just wanted to leave that dark, oppressive basement. Harold laughed a drunken laughter and asked Olaf if he had any gay erotica, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexuality of the videos. He simply liked to see people getting things introduced to them. When he said that, I got chills running down my spine. I asked myself if he meant it in just a sexual way, or if there was a more ominous meaning to it, but we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day the next day, and I was tired and thoroughly creeped out by him. When we were back in the house, I asked Harold if he trusted his friend, to which Harold answered that Olaf wasn't his friend. He was just an addict renting the basement. The government paid Harold the rent, and a nurse paid him a visit twice a week to bring him medication. And after dropping that bomb, he said goodnight and went to his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but my gut feeling, and him popping in the house unannounced when everyone else was out preparing for the wedding that weekend, I just really couldn't relax. The first time he went inside was to give me a flash drive with movies he'd illegally downloaded from the internet. He made sure to emphasize the illegal part. The second time he seemed high and wanted simply to let me know if I needed something, I could ask him for anything, but he asked me not to tell Harold about him going upstairs. He said that and then walked out very slowly and carefully, as if he knew he would fall if he rushed. When the wedding was over and the house was again empty except for Harold and me, the encounters with Olaf became strange and more often. One time while I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast, I turned around to find Olaf standing in the kitchen doorway, bleeding from his nose, staring at me. I jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, making a huge mess, but he didn't seem to notice. He simply started babbling incoherently while directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling on top of my head. I was petrified, trying to think of a train of actions that wouldn't trigger a violent response on him, when he simply turned around and quietly walked out of the house. I started locking the door whenever I was alone in the house since that day. When I told Harold all about this, he got visibly mad and went downstairs to yell and talk to Olaf. Harold told me he didn't like to have him in the basement, and he had tried to kick him out several times. But the government had always ruled against evicting Olaf, and Harold's sister was mostly responsible for it. She felt bad for the guy and was 100% on Olaf's side, just because he had the same name as her father. Go figure. So Harold had to learn to live with him in his basement, but only because Olaf was supposed to be clean and in treatment for his addiction. After that day, Olaf stopped being friendly with me and became just a cold, invasive presence in my life there. There was one day when I was in the barn chatting with a couple of Harold's friends when Olaf entered the barn to place his laptop and some homemade-looking gadget by the window. Despite nobody asking him, He began to explain to us he was using it to hack into people's networks to get their Wi-Fi passwords. You know, like everyone does, right? He gave me a nasty glare and then stormed out. I turned to Harold's friends and told them I was completely afraid of him, and I had this feeling he would attack me one day. Harold's friends told me that would never happen, but if I ever felt I was in danger, I could give them a call and they would pick me up. We exchanged numbers, hugged, and said goodbye for the night. The next day, things between Harold and me turned sour, mostly because I wasn't feeling safe anymore, and I had expressed my wish to instead go to Germany to visit the man who is now my husband. Apparently, Harold had hoped for us to grow closer, but it failed to let me know. In the end, I was exhausted and didn't want to deal with any of that anymore. I should mention that Harold had severe alcoholism I wasn't aware of until that month I spent with him, seeing him get filthy wasted on a daily basis. To some, that might be attractive, but not to me. So altogether, the situation was bad and I wanted out. I had done my job. I had done nothing wrong and I wanted to be able to relax away from both of them. The night I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway, Harold went out to get drunk and didn't come back until morning the next day. I had tried to stay up and wait for him to talk, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed, and I caught a glance of him walking towards the barn, with the dog and a six-pack of beers, through the living room window. I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but I discovered the internet was down. That's weird, I thought. In the whole time I'd been there, the internet never failed once. I went to the router and restarted it a couple of times to no avail. I decided to let it be. Maybe Harold had cut the internet as a way of drunk, childish punishment. So I would just get on with my morning routine and have breakfast before going to knock on the barn door. That would give him some time to blow off steam, I thought. I went downstairs to the bathroom, got comfortably naked and jumped in the shower, ready to refresh myself and sing a couple of songs to lift my spirit in preparation for the grim talk that awaited me with Harold. Halfway through the first song, I heard a loud bang coming from the front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I thought Harold must be pissed drunk and angry. I sighed while turning off the shower, thinking I was going to have a long argument, when the bathroom door slammed open, and I saw, to my horror, Olaf coming at me with a completely deranged expression on his face, wielding a big cutter knife, the kind employees use in warehouses to open boxes. For a few seconds, I couldn't think or focus on anything other than the knife in his hand and the fact that I was naked, wet, and cornered in a small bathroom in the middle of nowhere in Norway. I was paralyzed. My biggest fear was actually happening. I couldn't scream or move. I just kept staring at the knife he kept pulling and pushing, making that now horrifying noise that those blades do when operated. I was about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling, accusing me of playing Harold's feelings. He was calling me a liar and throwing in some threats about cutting me open and fucking me up if I tried to take anything from Harold. That, I think, is what got my gears moving once again. Him calling me a thief. I can be called whatever, but I'm not a thief, and I'm no liar. So standing there, getting myself angry at the psycho in front of me, threatening my life, my training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. I remembered the rules when dealing with altered addicts. Make eye contact, keep your hands down so you don't startle them, speak in a calm but dominant voice, and always refer to them by their name. And that's exactly what I did. Despite the fear and the certainty of me being stabbed to death, I stared at him in his cloudy, crazy, wide-open eyes and said, "Olaf, you are the thief. You are the one who keeps stealing Harold's silverware, Olaf. You are the one who keeps breaking into his house, Olaf. Harold is not your friend, Olaf. Harold doesn't even want you living here." It was a long shot, but it worked. My words made him confused, and I was able to take one single small step forward, making him take one small step back. He then charged at me with his rat and wielding his knife to my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping on my back and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched the knife forward, but I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him, every time gaining another step, pushing him little by little out of the bathroom. He might have noticed what I was doing, but by then, it was too late. When he took the last step out of the bathroom, I moved as fast as my terrorized body would allow me to, and I slammed the door on his stupid, crooked nose. I locked it immediately and pushed against it with all my body, while a storm of curses, punches, and kicks rained on that little farmhouse door. I remember praying to a god I don't really believe in to hold the door in place, to keep that psycho addict outside. There was nothing I could use in the bathroom to defend myself, nothing against an infuriated, high psychopath wielding a knife and possibly a broken nose. After what seemed to have been an eternity, I heard and felt a last really strong kick to the door, and then, to my relief, he stormed out of the house with a loud bang of the front door announcing his exit. However, I stayed put for another 20 minutes, not able to breathe or think of anything else than keeping that door closed. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't move. Eventually, my senses came back, and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door of the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew he could hear me moving on the first floor, and he had his stupid camera spying on the driveway. I jumped to the garden, jumped the fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged and screamed for Harold to let me in, but it was useless. The drunk fuck was living his drama, and I needed help. So I ran all the way to the next house where his sister lived, rang the bell, and when she opened, I explained to her as best as I could what had just happened. She didn't speak a word in English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes, until her expressions shifted from confusion to absolute terror, mirroring my own. She walked me up to the barn, opened the door, commanded Harold to guard me, and went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shocked and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what had just happened. His drunken state was gone by the time I finished explaining. He too went to the basement, and I could just hear the screams. They took him out. The sister and her husband got Olaf in the car and took him away. Harold stayed with me all day. I drank so much beer, but I simply couldn't get drunk. I wanted to get drunk. I wanted to forget, but I simply couldn't. I was told that Olaf admitted having the knife, and that his intentions were to make me fight him. So, in reality, he wanted an excuse to stab me. After all, he liked to see people having things introduced in them, right? That night I slept in the house while Harold kept guard. I had some tools with me to defend myself, and of course I slept fully dressed. It was a horrible night. Next morning, we went to the police to file a report, but even the cops seemed baffled and couldn't believe something like that could ever happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the cop who took my statement asked me if there was somewhere I could go while they sorted out all this mess with Olaf. I told him that in fact I was planning to visit Germany the very next day. The last day, I barely spoke with Harold. I didn't blame him, but he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf I was leaving and said he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he understood he had to defend Harold. So he, Olaf, cut off the internet, waited for me to go into the shower, and went upstairs to do his job. I left Norway without a single word, without looking back. They told me I could testify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information and promised me justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I haven't heard back from the police. When I asked Harold about it, he told me the police had dropped the case for lack of evidence, and Olaf is back in Harold's basement doing whatever it is he does. Life goes on. I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away. After some time, there's nothing left to burn. I try to focus on the good things of life, and life itself. Every day is now a gift or a chance, but the shadow of fear never really left me. I keep looking over my shoulder, keep studying people just in case I have to defend myself. I still have a sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at the gym, where I am more vulnerable. I can't help thinking that anyone else would have ended up a bloated corpse in a pool of blood in the shower, going unnoticed for hours and hours until someone had to use the bathroom. If I had done something different, if Olaf hadn't been so high to be intimidated by my words, that bloated corpse would have been me. I still don't know how to get rid of that thought, but I try. All I know is that Olaf is free, and I really, really, really do not want to meet him again. In 1995, every morning I drove over to Stone Mountain from Atlanta for a jog around the 5-mile loop as a warm-up. Then I'd sprint up the mountain once or twice to finish off. There was only one rocky part of the mountain cleared for going up and down, and it was the less steep side of the mountain, near the main entrance. That time of the morning, there was either nobody else there or maybe one other person at times. So one morning, I'd been on the loop and was about a mile or two in, and a white van with no windows drives by kind of slow. I took note of that, of course, but I kept going as it was my only option. A while later, the van comes back around from behind again, and I started to get seriously alerted because I hadn't seen anybody else out there at that point. I was pretty well out in the middle of nowhere. The van drives past and disappears around the curve, then comes back towards me even slower. I was good and scared at that point, and started to run a bit faster. I tried to make myself look tough and menacing as I ran. The van kept going without stopping, so I tried to talk myself into it just being a maintenance worker or something, and thanked my lucky stars that everything was okay. Well, it wasn't okay, and about a minute later, the van had turned around and come up behind me again, and pulled up just ahead of me. It stopped as I was running towards it. I was trying to quickly figure out what the hell to do. I'd come to a stop when I saw the back doors of the van fly open towards me. I knew I couldn't outrun a van in either direction, so I immediately decided my only option was to sprint up the mountain as fast as I could, and hope to outrun them. So I busted up the rocky, wooded, thick-brushed mountain as fast as I could. This person took off after me, but I did not look back once. It was really hard. There was no clear path, and I had to dodge stuff and run in jagged directions to get away. I heard them behind me for what seemed like a minute, then I didn't hear anything after that. I still didn't look back. I just kept busting upwards as fast as I could. I got to the top, checked my scrapes, and caught my breath before rushing back down the cleared path and back to my car. I never saw anyone else or the van after that, although I was scared to death and on high alert until I got to my car. There was a welcome center down near the entrance, but at the time it was not open. This was before cell phones as well. I got into my car as fast as I could and headed back home, feeling so lucky and fortunate that I was able to get away. I didn't go back there in the mornings anymore after that, and I didn't go back for a while afterwards out of fear. When I finally did start going back, I took pepper spray and didn't start going out until later in the day, when there would be others out. I have no idea what was up with that guy or what he was doing or trying to do, But still, all these years later, I can't come up with anything feasible that wasn't likely to be a seriously bad thing for me. He said nothing, just chased me. I called the police when I got home and told them what happened. They just took note of what I reported, and that was it. I never heard anything else about it. My mother was head night shift nurse for a rich health clinic where people would pay thousands of dollars to stay for 6 weeks to cure them of whatever illness. It was also in the middle of nowhere on 600 acres of land. The crazy thing about this place, though, was that since it had a lot of wilderness, it was known to have a lot of occult activity. I don't think it's related, but here's my story of when we lived there. This happened when I was 12 years old. Our one-story home was at the top of a hill where there was only one other house not too far from us. My mom, like every night, would drive her car to the clinic, which was roughly a little more than a mile away. You could always tell when she would be leaving or coming, because there wasn't any pavement and it was strictly rocks and gravel, so the car would be extremely loud in the dead of night. Early in the week, she had lost her keys and had been using her spares. This night in particular, I was sitting in my bedroom playing PlayStation when all of a sudden I get this heavy mental push to turn everything off, all the lights, and face the wall pretending I'm sleeping. My heart is racing for no reason since I'm just laying down, but no more than 5 minutes later, I hear my door open, yet I didn't hear any car drive up. Our home was fairly small with wooden floors. From the entrance, I hear heavy footsteps slowly walk through the living room, as if whoever is there is searching for something. They continue to walk into the kitchen, where my room is directly connected to. They turn on the light to the kitchen. At this point, my heart is pounding so hard, it is trying to rip through my chest, but the same mental urge is screaming, "Do not move. Do not make a sound." The steps walk through the kitchen and stop at the entrance overlooking where I'm sleeping. It felt like an eternity as I helplessly laid there with my eyes closed, focused on not moving while this person just stared at me. After who knows how long, the person slowly walked out of my home and left. I waited anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes before moving, just in case they were waiting for me to get up. I called my mom to see if she'd randomly stopped home. She said no. I told her what happened, and we changed all the locks and added a bar lock. It's one of the creepiest things to ever happen to me, but there are so many stories from when we lived at that place. It was so scary. This happened a while ago, and it still creeps me out to think about it. I used to drive for Uber, and I've met many different people. Most of them were pretty cool, fun to talk to, and some were iffy. One particular day, I wasn't too busy, so I went driving around, waiting for my phone to ding. Finally, it did. It was this guy who lived at an apartment complex. He was dressed a little strangely, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, he gets into the back seat and puts his legs up on the back of the passenger seat. Once again, I didn't think anything of it. He wasn't hurting anyone, and I figured he was comfortable. As I'm pulling away, he tells me that we're actually going to a different address than the one he put in, which did strike me as odd, but I obliged his request. He gave me the most confusing directions ever, and it was a bit of a longer drive than I anticipated. I'd started to get nervous when he began to ask me questions. It was like he was interviewing me or something. I answered each one ambiguously. The questions were mostly about the healthcare system and how much he didn't like it. It wasn't until he asked me if I was afraid to die that I became really nervous. I mean, I'm screaming in my head that I really hoped we were near his destination. I just wanted him out of my car. Instinctively, I told him I wasn't afraid to die. I tried to maintain my lighthearted conversation without him realizing how nervous that he made me. As I drove, I also noticed that he put a glob of some substance under his nose, something like petroleum jelly or whatever. That also struck me as odd. As we approached a stoplight for the umpteenth time, he finally told me his stop was just on the right. It was a house. I pulled up into the driveway and he got out. Instead of saying one word to me, he went to the side of the house and creepily disappeared into the bushes instead of going to the door. I was curious about what he was up to, but I took this chance just to get out of there. I left and called it a day. I went straight home after that. Hey all, it's great to see that Uber now warns users to always check the license plate before getting into a car. But my story happened about a year before that was put into place. A few friends and I were spending New Year's Eve at a house party. The new year hit, the party was winding down, and my friend ordered an Uber. Mind you, all four of my companions were some combination of pissed drunk or baked out of their minds. I was definitely buzzed, but by far the most sober one of the group. I assumed the role of mom friend by corralling the group to the street to wait for the car. It was freezing, pitch black, and the street was completely empty. A car pulled up, and my friend announced that it was our Uber, so everyone started to make their way over. Out of nowhere, I get this sick feeling in my gut. My lizard brain kicks into overdrive and tells me to get the hell away from that car. That's when I realized the car was missing an Uber sticker. Since my friend was too drunk to care, I grabbed her phone to check the license plate. This was not our Uber. I realized this at the same moment that my friend walked over to the driver's side window to ask if the Uber was for Sarah. He told her that it was. I yelled to her that this was the wrong car, but she was too far gone. But he says he's our driver, she slurred. I channeled my inner camp counselor and yelled at her that this was not our driver and that the car had the wrong license plate. Instead of walking away from the car, she asked him why the license plate was different if he was here for Sarah. And I shit you not, this fuck tells her that he put the wrong license plate on the car this morning. She was so drunk that she believed him and almost opened the door to get inside. I yelled at her to get the fuck away from the car right now, because this is not our driver. Finally, she starts to walk away, but the driver grabs her by the arm and tries to force her in. One of my friends next to Sarah pulls her away, but the guy looks visibly unhinged at this point and ordered her to get in the car. The first thing I could think to do was take my phone out, start filming the car and yell, "Hey, asshole, I'm filming you." This got his attention, and he was down the street before I could say another word. Not a second later, our real Uber pulls up. We were all spooked, but they were drunk, tired, and ready to let it go to keep the good vibe going. All I could think of was some drunk girl leaving a party alone and forgetting to check the license plate. So, as the only one who wanted to do something, and also the only one under 21, I decided to call the cops. Not great in hindsight, but I'd rather get busted for being just shy of 21 and kind of buzzed than let somebody get possibly kidnapped and whatever else. It all turned out just fine, and they caught the guy before he could find another victim, but we never found out what his motive was or what happened after that. The best part of the ordeal, though, was the one guy in our group and his reaction. I've known him since kindergarten, and he's one of the smartest people I know, but he was so crossfaded that he actually believed the guy was, and I quote, "just a nice guy trying to help us out." He tried to convince me not to call the police, because it would only ruin the guy's night. He said it was New Year's and he should have some fun. He still vehemently denies this ever happened. But, in conclusion, always check your Uber's license plate. This happened 3 years ago while my former relationship was ending. I was about 27 years old. Me and my ex-boyfriend weren't living together anymore. We were separated for a few months, but not quite broken up yet. I just found out from his twin brother that he was keeping me as a backup while having fun with other girls, so I decided to end things. It was my birthday. I was a bit emotional about this whole situation, so I decided to go to his place and end it properly, face to face. I took an Uber and went to the other side of town. I got there, we talked and ended things on good terms given the situation. Now it was time to call an Uber and go back home. This was happening in November on a rainy night at about 2 a.m. My ride came and I got in. I was just looking out the window and thinking. After 5 minutes or so, I noticed that my Uber driver was looking at me in the rearview mirror every second when he could take his eyes off the road. I brushed it off. This wasn't the first time when it happened, and I was honestly too sad to care. But then I noticed he slowed down a lot. This is when I started to pay attention to my surroundings, but without giving him the sensation that I was doing so. I noticed that he was a tall, thin guy, 25 to 30 years old. He looked like he wasn't taking very good care of himself, and his car was actually pretty dirty. I was just hoping to get home safe and faster at this point. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking. "You're beautiful," he said. "Thanks," I said after a long pause. "What's your name?" After another long pause, I whispered my name. I realized that he could see it in the Uber app anyway. What a hot name. I've always wanted to have sex with a girl named that. I was in total, terrified silence, and then he started looking at me in the rearview mirror again, staring at me. He started talking and rambling without pause, but he was expecting clear responses and reactions from me. "Do you have a boyfriend?" "Yes," I quickly chimed in. "What a shame. I wanted you for myself." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there in silence. "But I don't mind the boyfriend. Let's go somewhere else. Come on. Change the address in the app, because I can't. Only you can. I know a place where we can go to be alone and smoke some weed." "No, I can't. Take me to the address from the app, please," I said to him. At this point, I started to pay close attention to the route he was taking. I was so ready to jump out of the car if the situation had gotten really dangerous. Then he puts on a local rap song which I've never heard before. The lyrics were very explicit, describing what a singer does to a girl during sex. They were extremely explicit lyrics. Hear that? That's how being with me would be like. I would do everything like that. You'd come back, begging for more. I was in total silence. At this point, I started messaging my ex, telling him what was happening. It was also a good excuse to not have to look at him or reply. "What do you think about that?" I just stayed sat in silence, texting my ex. I asked, "What do you think about that?" he yelled. My heart dropped. I froze. "I haven't heard this song before," I replied to him. "Do you smoke weed?" "No," I replied. "Smoke a joint with me." "No, thank you." "Are you home alone? I could call it a night and go to your place and show you what I'm talking about." My heart was racing so bad at this point. I was so scared and shaking so hard. I was home alone, actually living alone. I decided to start recording him from here on and send the recording to my ex. "No, my parents are waiting for me," I said to him. That sucks, man, but we can stay in the car. I'll join you in the back seat. We'll find a spot where it's dark." "No, I need to go home. I'm tired," I told him. "Come on, you'll enjoy it. Trust me." Where did I put that weed? And then he started searching for his weed. My ex listened to this part and called me. I was so relieved when I saw my phone ringing. I answered, and I made sure that the driver would hear that I'm on the phone with someone. He kept on talking, but I didn't hear much because he seemed to be upset about my phone call, and he was mostly talking to himself. My ex was furious, but told me to say things out loud like where I am, when I get home, and other stuff like my mom texted me and is waiting for me, to say that I will call him when I get home and everything like that. I ended the call and the driver asked me if that was my boyfriend. I said it was. He kept silent for about 5 minutes, and I was so anxious to get home. We had about 5 more minutes before getting to my address. When he saw on the map that we were getting close, he started asking me again to go somewhere or stay in the car with him, to smoke with him, to tell him everything about me and my life, that he thinks he fell in love, to break up with my boyfriend. His speech was getting scarier, and he was getting more and more anxious that he couldn't convince me. He was turning to look at me, stops at lights so he could turn to me. After what seemed like forever and shaking like a leaf, when we got in front of my building, I practically jumped out of the car, and he said, No, don't go to your apartment. Let me come with you." I ran and entered the building. I didn't turn on the lights in the staircase because I didn't want him to see the floor I lived in. I stood there in darkness and peeked out the window to see if he was gone. He wasn't. He was looking at the floor, probably expecting to see where the lights turned on. I couldn't even enter my apartment because I'd left the lights on in my hallway, and he would have seen me in there. I waited 5 minutes and he slowly left. I quickly entered my apartment and locked everything, but I did not turn off or on any lights, just so it wouldn't seem like someone had gotten home or something. I went to peek out the window to be sure that he left. He indeed did leave, but to my surprise I saw him back and he was parked this time. I was scared out of my mind. I know that many of you would say I should have called the police, but in my country, the police don't come for stuff like this. They barely show up in an hour if someone's being beaten or something. So there he was, just sitting there. Then I get a message from an unknown number. It was telling me to come back downstairs because he's waiting for me. I froze and cried at this point. It was like my life was about to change because of a 30 to 40 minute ride with an unstable person. I didn't even know how he could get my number from the Uber app. I didn't reply. He sent a few more messages. I remember one in particular that really creeped me out. He was asking me to at least smoke a cigarette with him on the phone, just so he could hear me breathing and smoking. I messaged back saying to leave me alone. He started calling my phone and I blocked the number. I was afraid that he would get so angry and try to enter the building and find me. I was looking out the window from behind a curtain, and I saw that after I blocked him, when he tried to call and couldn't, he started smashing his phone against the steering wheel. He finally left after 40 minutes or so of staying there. I stayed at the window, watching for another 2 hours or so. He didn't return, thank God. The next day he messaged and called from another number, but I blocked that one as well. He tried once more 1 year later. I was honestly so surprised, but I blocked that number too, and thankfully I have not heard from him again. I reported everything to the Uber app, and I really hope they took measures, but honestly I don't understand why nobody before me reported him. It didn't feel like it was the first time when he did this. It was somehow so easy for him. It's one of the worst experiences I have ever had. When I was 13 years old, my mom had a breakdown and could not work for over a year. This caused us some economic issues, and we lost a lot of things in our house. Our car was our main problem. It broke down, and my mom didn't have enough money to get someone to fix it, so all she could do was get rid of it. Without a car, we all started taking the bus and train everywhere. Me and my brother took the bus to school, and our school was kind enough to get us taxis to drive us home. One day, I was outside waiting for my taxi to come. The taxi usually comes about 15 minutes after I end the last session. But that day, it was about 50 minutes late. Then when it finally came, I jumped inside and he drove off. I was a little sour that I had to wait almost an hour, but I didn't complain since I was just happy to be on my way home. Since I took the taxi home every single day of school, I had started recognizing the drivers. The driver that day was new. I hadn't seen him before. He had a full beard and an AC/DC cap on. The first thing he did after he drove off was apologize for being so late. I told him it was okay, and he started up a conversation. He asked me if I wanted him to put some music on. I said sure. I discovered quite quickly that he had the same taste of music as me, so I felt right at home. I had no worries at all. A week or so later, I was waiting outside for the taxi. I realized the taxi was late again. A thought came to my mind that maybe it was that driver. He had quickly become my favorite driver since he'd been so friendly and talkative, but I hadn't seen him since that one time. And just as quick as that thought came to my mind, the taxi arrived. And surprise, surprise, it was him. I decided to sit at the front this time for some reason, and we start up a new conversation. I remember his phone's notification tone. I thought it was funny, so I laughed a bit, and that started up a conversation about how he found himself to be funnier than most guys. He asked me if I agreed, and that's when warning bells started ringing in my head. I shook it off, however. Everyone says weird things sometimes. It's okay, right? After a little bit of talking, he asked about my age. Viewing it as an innocent question, I answered that I just turned 15. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, and then came the question, "Do you have Snapchat?" I got silent for a while. My alarm bells were wailing like crazy, and I knew that this was wrong. He was like 30, and I was 15. He was my taxi driver. Why would I want to talk to my taxi driver in my spare time? I was scared to turn him down, though. I didn't know what he would do if I just turned him down. It's not like he was forcing it on me or that he was trying to be intimidating, but I just didn't trust that it would turn out all right if I turned him down. So I said yes and wrote my username on the paper. When I came home that afternoon, I felt really guilty about it. It didn't feel right at all. I got into the house, went into my room, sat down on my bed with my phone in front of me, and I just stared at it. I was terrified that he was going to add me on it and start talking, but I also wondered if I misspelled my username and that he would question me about it the next time he picked me up. And then after 10 minutes came the notification. He added me. He had sent a, "Hey." I pulled myself together and started to chat with him. At first it was innocent, but then it started getting weird. For everything I said, he would come up with a way to compliment me or be flirty. For example, I asked him, "So where do you live?" "Small town just right outside of yours. Why? Do you want to come visit sometime?" He replied. I also asked him, "What do you do in your spare time?" "Fishing. It's a guilty pleasure of mine," he responded. "I've always wanted to try it out," I said. "We can do it together sometime," he told me. And then came the creepiest question. I'd started catching on to what he was after, so I questioned him about it. "Why did you even add me?" "What? I thought you liked older men," he said. Yeah, it was creepy. And no, I don't like older men. He had apparently thought that since I liked having a conversation with them, that I liked him or something. So the day after, I was terrified that he was going to pick me up. I thought about blocking him or telling him to stop talking to me. But I was a 15-year-old girl, and he was a big 30-year-old grown man. What if he got mad? God knows what he would do the next time he picked me up, as he was in a sour mood. To my absolute relief, the taxi that picked me up that day was a different driver. And as quick as I got in, I told him about what had happened. I asked him to tell his boss or whatever to maybe reassign him so I wouldn't have to see him. But luckily the boss was smarter than that. The next day the driver told me that he'd been fired and was never gonna do another taxi job in his life. Apparently he'd been preying on a lot of other girls too, but none of them had spoken out about it. I blocked his Snapchat and haven't seen him since. This was a Sunday night. I was at the airport about to request an Uber when I checked the Lyft prices. $20 cheaper to take a Lyft. So I requested one and almost cancelled it because it was taking a while to find someone. When finally a driver was found, pretty much as soon as I entered the car and we started driving, he saw where I lived and started talking about murdering people in the city I lived in. And it wasn't just a one-off line either. He kept going on and on about it. How we'd get the cold sweats afterwards, and decided he didn't want to feel that, so he'd try not to. During this, I'm texting my boyfriend because this guy is just making me feel really weird. I wasn't really trying to converse with him at all, so all of this was unsolicited information. Then he was saying how he was going to do a haunted house and make it seem really lame, like it was over. And then once you leave, when you thought you were safe, he'd get you. I asked him, how would you do that? Because I feel like a lot of people are really aware of their surroundings, and I would definitely see you coming. And then he said, you never know, I might just get you tonight. I laughed and said, I don't think so, as he's literally pulling up to my apartment. When we parked, he just kept talking. I said okay, bye, and I had to unlock the door myself. When I got out to grab my luggage from the trunk, he almost took off with it. It was really weird when he picked me up and dropped me off. He'd just stand behind me like a weirdo. It was really uncomfortable. He definitely knows which apartment I live in, and I'm pretty sure Lyft fired him. I was visiting a family member in a subacute rehab facility. There was an issue with my family member receiving a bill for a service that wasn't used, and I was going downstairs to speak to someone about it. As I was waiting for the elevator to go downstairs, a woman who was also waiting smiled at me and started to talk to me. I didn't think anything of it because most of the time, people just do the standard friendly small talk. Until I went to make a phone call, that is. While I had the phone to my ear, she kept asking me questions. Are you calling an Uber right now? She asked. No, I replied. I live in the same town as you. Let me take you home. Don't call an Uber, she said. I'm not going home. I'm not calling an Uber. I just have to talk to the receptionist about something, I said. But I can take you home. I don't mind. Let me drive you home, she said. Thankfully, the elevator door opened, and I quickly walked to the front desk. I started talking to the person at reception, and she just stood on the side of the desk staring, listening to our conversation. I just ignored it. I kept talking until I guess she finally realized I wasn't leaving, and then she left. Luckily, I wasn't leaving, because I don't know if she would have been waiting outside for me. I know that woman could have been trying to be nice, but the way she was pushing and acting, I don't think that was the case. I remembered something that had happened to my best friend and I a few years ago, and figured I might share it. While my best friend, at the time, and myself were seniors in high school, we went on a weekend trip to visit my grandmother a couple of hours away from my town in Georgia, USA. The town we lived in was comparatively small for the state, but one of the biggest towns within a few hours. But we had to travel about 2.5 hours through tiny, somewhat redneck towns to get to my grandmother's place. We were on our way home when we had to stop at a gas station literally in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking cornfields, cotton fields, streets with no signs or lights, not even stop signs, and definitely no cell service. The convenience store attached to the gas station had maybe a couple of snacks inside, but it looked deserted from the outside, and we didn't bother to get anything other than gas. I paid with card, mainly because I didn't want to leave my 5'1", 100-pound friend alone in the car, while I went alone inside. Another car pulled up on the other side of the single gas pump while I just started pumping gas, and because of everything I read on Reddit, I already had a weird feeling and decided to stay alert and stand outside the car with my driver's side door open, so my friend could see and hear everything going on. A thin, late 50s older man got out of the car and seemed to be paying at the pump and standing beside his car while he got gas. But after a few seconds, he walked around the pump and maneuvered himself around my car door to stand within a foot of me and asked if he could pump my gas for me. Luckily, the gas nozzle was locked, so it was pumping without me having to hold it. I immediately placed myself between the opening of the door and the man. I prepared myself to either shut the door with me inside or move and slam it behind me to protect my friend if necessary. I calmly told him that it was fine, no thank you. He looked me up and down with the corner of his lip tilted up, and he said, "Pretty girls like you shouldn't be out here all alone, and you definitely shouldn't have to do this by yourself. Let a man help you, baby." He then covered my hand with his own as he reached for the gas pump I was holding. I jerked my hand out from underneath his and slammed my car door shut. Orange flags started tinting red, and my usual overly polite demeanor turned serious as I remembered something I'd read here. It said it was better to be safe and to seem mean rather than be polite and uncomfortable. So I responded and said, "Sir, get away from me. I can pump my own gas and I've already said no thank you. Leave us alone." He didn't move, only raised his chin and managed to make eye contact with me, all lip tilt gone. I stared him down and figured I'd gotten enough gas to last us enough time to get the hell out of wherever we were. So I maintained eye contact, pulled the nozzle out, and basically threw it back onto the pump before getting into my car, and drove away before he had even moved. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that his car wasn't even being filled up with gas, telling me he was driving by and decided to help a damsel in distress out. My friend was shaking the whole way home, telling me she would have just let the man pump her gas, but I'm just glad some of the confidence I've gained from reading Reddit helped me stay attentive and respond confidently enough to get out of the situation. I was playing disc golf by myself one day, and I lost a disc in the woods. As I was looking for it, I heard a woman yell, "You're crazy." The guy responded to the effect of, "You were supposed to keep your heart open. How is this keeping your heart open?" They were on the path on the other side of the trees, and the woman was walking away from the guy. I heard someone walking through the woods towards me. It was the guy. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "Hey, you're Luke, aren't you?" I said no, and for some reason told him my actual name. He shook my hand and asked, "What are you doing?" "Listening." I told him I was looking for a disc, and he said, "Oh, you're a disc golfer, huh?" He said that something had been opened, but I wasn't sure what to make of that. Then he looked into my eyes and said calmly, "You're all fucked. You're all fucked, and you don't even know it." It was at that point I turned and walked away, leaving my disc and never coming back for it. I don't think I've been back to that park since. When I was 14, I had a boyfriend who my parents wouldn't let me see. I was so in love with him, as any 14-year-old would be. So much so that I decided it would be a good idea to sneak out of my house at 3 a.m. in attempts to see him. My boyfriend at the time quite obviously did not care about my safety in this situation, so he told me to walk all the way to the Taco Bell near his house, which was probably over a half-an-hour walk on foot. But I was stupid and I wanted to see him, so I agreed. I remember I put on short shorts and other clothes in an attempt to look cute for my boyfriend, completely oblivious to how stupid this would be. I managed to get out of my house and I started walking down the street. I was nervous, but I was alone, so I didn't feel threatened. Right as I was passing the power lines, a pickup truck turns onto the road and slowly starts driving towards me. The part that scared me the most, the car completely stopped, right in front of the power lines, almost trapping me in. I saw a man inside the car look at me, and right in that moment, I got so scared I started running as fast as I could. I wound up at the house of some kid from school that I was friends with. I started knocking on his window in a panic. He opened his blinds and I explained what happened. He said he would tell his older brother, and I begged for him to drive me to Taco Bell, but he kept saying he would only drive me home. I still wonder what that guy's intentions were. When I was 8, we moved to military housing adjacent to the big base. I was a weird child and spent a lot of time in my tree reading if I wasn't out with the local hooligans playing in boxes like overgrown cats. There was a pomegranate bush in our yard, so I would eat one while lounging on a thick branch with an R.L. Stine novel. I kept noticing this guy walking back and forth on multiple occasions, but who was I to judge what an adult does? I was home alone one day, so I stayed in my backyard reading in the shade of an overgrown bush, but still visible to a passerby. That same guy was looking around our backyard that faced tennis courts and open desert wilderness. He starts casually trying to lift the gate hatch, so I ran inside and locked the doors. I told my parents later on, and they listened, but they thought I was being dramatic. About a week later, I was at my friend's house with 3 other girls. We were in bathing suits playing in hose water in a mini pool, trying to find relief from the sweltering heat. My friend's house faced a large park, and one of them noticed this guy watching us. Someone went in to tell their parents, but the guy must have noticed all of us going from wild animals to a small circle with little animation. My friend's mother was from Korea and ran out with a wooden spoon, yelling in rage Korean. She chased after the already retreating lurker, but gave up, locked us inside, and called the base police. I told them about the lurker, but I couldn't be sure it was the same one. The mother noticed he had a camera with him. It was in the 90s and a big one. We ate Keebler cookies, vanilla with fudge in the middle, while her mother sobbed to the police. Sex trafficking is a more tangible fear for some than others. The base police finally called my parents, and they finally took me seriously. The house was searched, which I just thought was normal protocol. I was heavily monitored by them and not able to do much without my mother in arm's reach. One day about a week or so later, we were eating lunch at a fast food place, and I recognized the guy. I tell my dad, and he asked me if I was sure, and when I confirmed, he lunged at the guy and threw him back in his chair. The base cops came and looked through his camera to find pictures of me with my friends and at recess. He was arrested immediately, and the weirdest part about it, he had broken into our house and made some rat's nest of my things in his home. They found everything from baby pictures to clothing, and the worst part about it, there were no charges because my dad was about to retire and get a big job in Michigan. He was also high-ranking, which probably had nothing to do with it though. When talking to my mom about it years later, She told me he had accessed our attic and cut through the AC vent to watch me through it. That would explain why my room was always hot. But now I wonder if she is the one being dramatic. And yes, this story is true to the best of my recollection. In the fall of 2015, I began college in a very small town in the middle of nowhere. Its population as of 2019 is 55,489. This town was in the middle of the Midwestern state I lived in the middle of the Great Plains. The town pretty much only existed because of the college. It was a state college which had about 20,000 students a year. As you can imagine, the college brought in a plethora of faculty, businesses, and really put the town on the map. I personally stuck out like a sore thumb. You see, even though I lived in the Bible Belt, I'd been a Wiccan since I was 15. I never identified with Jesus and God when I grew old enough to dissect the Christian faith. A big aspect about my personality is that I'm very accepting. I mention this because it, ultimately, led to some chaos later on. I'm the class clown mom friend type. I'm sure you know the type. Goofy and caring. Pretty much ride or die. So I was in the middle of nowhere, at the beginning of my college career, and I was surrounded by strangers who were just as nervous and awkward as I was. Due to being in the middle of the Bible Belt, my friends really loved my tarot card, medium, future-seeing persona. Quickly, while making new friends, I ran into a few folks who wanted to learn how to read tarot. We lived in the same dorm community. They were nice, and I loved teaching. So that's how I ended up getting into cahoots with Alex, Davis, April, Sam, Rosie, Katie, and Sky. They were friends from the year prior, so I was sort of folded into the friend group as the newest, shiniest object. After mentioning that I read tarot, the group was over the moon. One afternoon, in the basement of our dormitory, I had a tarot reading session for the group. It was a lazy fall day, mid-November. Surrounded by soda cans, Kit Kats, and our schoolwork, I began to read each and every group member's cards. With reading, you start to peek into a person's soul. Each card gives you a sliver of personhood. I quite regularly have had to consult people for the truth that lies within their reading. I often had to play the role of the therapist, after the cards read people for filth, so it was unsurprising to me when the group sat in shock and curiosity, goosebumps prickling their arms. It was a normal response. Hours flew by. I did general readings, question-based readings, love life readings, you name it. As the time rolled on, more of my talent slipped out. Soon I was reading palms, giving psychic advice, talking about my Wiccan journey. I believe that what you take from the earth, you should give back. It is inherent to my belief system to do everything with love, to never mean any ill will. Alex asked me if I could teach them about my belief systems, then Katie, then Davis. Before I knew it, everyone in the group had asked me for an impromptu teaching. Don't get this wrong, I love teaching, but more so, I craved this positive attention. My childhood was quite awful. I was very abused. I just wanted people who cared about me. These people were some of the first who really seemed to care about me, who were really interested in what I had to say. So, with rose-colored glasses, I began a fun little information session with my brand new friends. I didn't see the warning signs. What started out as little meetings in the study rooms turned into hour-long lectures where the group hung on to every single word I said. As we got closer, more of my horrific past was uncovered. I shared tales of my trauma, all of the times I should have died, of the beatings, of how my mom tried to murder me. I thought I had found my tribe. I was really excited and pleased to be around folks. I didn't start to see the warning signs until it was too late. Things went smoothly for a while, a routine of teaching the group, hanging out, having dinner, talking about normal things. Things like school and what was going on in the dormitory communities. Things felt pretty normal. I really liked it. One of the group members, Davis, was transitioning female to male, and he struggled a lot with his identity. He was raised in a pretty strict household, so his transition wasn't taken very well by his family. He also struggled with borderline personality disorder, which made people in the group uncomfortable. I think because they didn't understand it. Keep in mind, mental health at the time wasn't really something that people were open about, being as it was in the Bible Belt. So, Davis would occasionally act erratic, start fights, get worked up, cry randomly, things like that. I'm sure part of this was due to transitioning. I can't imagine how emotional and hard it would be to go through that. What really set things off was when Davis started doubting if he should fully transition or not. Davis had already been on testosterone for quite some time, was male presenting, but did not have top surgery yet. One day, right before spring break, Davis had worn a dress, makeup, and heels around campus. At the time I thought it was kind of strange, but I figured it was Davis's life, so it didn't matter to me. The rest of the group, however, started to obsess over this. It was very out of character, but the group thought there was more to it. When Davis left for class, adorned in his dress and heels, Alex started speculating. There was a long, weird history between Alex, Davis, and Sky, one where Davis was sort of relationship-like flirting with both Alex and Sky, creating some animosity. Alex and Sky were best friends, but Davis had sort of wiggled his way into both of their hearts. Alex wasn't really one to discuss their feelings, so they pretended this love triangle didn't affect them, but Alex had become bitter. After Davis had walked out, Sky in tow, Alex began their speculation. What's wrong with him? Why is he acting like that? It's like I hardly know him. Katie, one for gossip, joined in. It's honestly like Davis is a completely different person. I don't know who this is, but I hate him. He's taking advantage of Sky, she said. The rest of the conversation began to snowball. It was a frustrating situation for those who had been in the friend group for a long time. I was pretty much indifferent. I didn't know what was going on, and honestly, I thought that people were kind of making a fuss out of nothing. If you're uncomfortable with what's happening, then talk it out. I digress. I had been working on a term paper, not really minding too much about the conversation, until April asked me, "Do you think you could be messing around with some bad magic?" I shrugged. Davis had asked about love spells and other stuff I don't really mess with. He was really into the idea that he could put a spell on someone and make them fall in love with him. I told him that taking away free will is something you should never mess with. The universe doesn't do kindly to those who harm, obstruct, or take free will away from someone. April had been there when Davis asked. When Alex looked questioningly at her, April spilled the beans. Something in Alex's face contorted, as if you could see heartbreak turn into pure rage. Alex excused themselves, and that was that. I remember being a little stressed about the situation. I hated conflict back then. I was spending spring break at Rosie's house. Her and Sam lived in the same town. Alex and Katie would be there too. When I agreed to spend the break with them, it was before drama had started. But by the time we got to spring break, it was too late to change my plans. The whole break was spent listening to the conspiracy grow. The four of them had begun to elaborate on this bad magic idea. Rosie thought that maybe Davis was possessed. I told them that I didn't think it was likely. I had a feeling things were starting to go awry. Things felt weird. I'd never been in the presence of a group of people who just accused another of being possessed. Things were weird. When I shot down the possession idea, they mentioned the time Davis growled the week prior. We were playing an online game when Davis growled as a response. I had jokingly said he sounded like a demon. I still told them that it was nothing, but they would not let up. Realizing I was in trouble, I came up with a quick solution. I told them we could do some protection spells, so if anything was going awry, we would be okay. That seemed to appease them well enough. Luckily, they left the topic alone until we were heading back to the campus. "We need to do an exorcism on Davis," Rosie said, a wild look in her eyes. Rosie had dabbled in paganism before she had met me, so she already had a solid set of beliefs and theories. The issue here, however, was that Rosie and Sam thought they could use their paganism as a tool to control those around them. I tried to correct this thought process, as it was against my belief system, which they seemed really receptive to, until they felt threatened. David had sent a text message to Rosie about some drama with Alex and Sky, sending Rosie into a spiral. Before I knew it, the narrative shifted into Davis is possessed by the demon Lilith. I didn't know what to do. I told him that he wasn't. I said it didn't make any sense. It was too late. I didn't know. I figured that if I got back to campus, took some time away from them, everyone would calm down. So that's what I did. I tried to do as much damage control as I could on the rest of the ride, but then when I got back to the dorm, I locked myself away in my room. When asked, I just said I was behind on work from spring break. Things were quiet and I felt safe. I figured it was temporary insanity or something. I sat downstairs talking to April a few days after I had locked myself away. We were just chit-chatting about what she had done over the break when I saw Rosie and Katie rush past the sitting room. They were frantic. They waved at us when they ran past, but didn't say anything. A little while later, Sky ran in the same direction, crying. When he saw us, he rushed in. "Davis said he's a demon and needed to be exorcised," he said. I jumped to my feet and started running towards his dorm. Sam and Alex stood in the hallway. Their faces hardened when they saw me, Sky, and April walking up. "You're not allowed in there. Davis is a danger to you," Sam said. He admitted he was possessed. "He's not possessed. Let me in there," I said. We bickered for a while, until I said that if they were going to do an exorcism, they needed me in there. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Davis was laid on the bed, tied to his bed frame. He was crying. Rosie and Katie were inside, setting some things around the bed. Rosie held a tattered old book in her hand. There was sage burning on a plate. Katie yelled something, but I couldn't focus. I just kept thinking that these people were fucking crazy. All I could see was Davis, crying on the bed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was possessed. I didn't know I was going to hurt you," Davis wailed, shaking. "We're going to get the demon out. You're going to be okay," one of them said. I just kept saying that he wasn't possessed, but nobody was listening to me. That's when I saw the knife. It was bronze in color, with something dark crusted on it. It sat in a bowl from the dining hall, sat in a mix of what looked like salt and what looked to be blood. In shock, I looked over to Rosie, spotting bloody gauze on her arm. It was like my world stopped. At this point, I had realized these people were crazy. I didn't think they were killer crazy. I had seen enough scary movies that I could only imagine what was going to happen. I grabbed the knife and cut through the cloth that tied Davis down, grabbed his wrist, and bolted from the room. I called Davis's mom and told her to come get him. We went to my dorm until she got there, with me just trying to talk some sense into him. Davis went home shortly after. Rosie, Katie, Sam, and Alex were blowing up my phone. April had come with me when I ran out with Davis. When he had gone home, she started to talk about how I needed to be careful if Hillary Clinton were elected president, because I was special. My mother had told me that she had to kill me, or else the government would get me, that I was special. April knew this. Apparently she believed it too. I just nodded, telling her I needed to get to sleep. After she left, I started filing paperwork to transfer schools. I moved 2 hours away, blocking everyone in the group's phone numbers. I couldn't believe everything that had happened, but looking back, I started to see that the signs were there all along. The passing, "You're like a witchy Jesus," or even blind faith in everything I said. The most memorable moment was when I told them that the sky was actually green. I was just joking around, being a sarcastic asshole, but April and Alex just nodded. When I said I was joking, April defended them, saying, "Well, technically the sky just reflects the earth, so it kind of is green." Hindsight in 2020, I accidentally started a cult, creating a small hellhole where everyone blindly believed everything I said and thought I was the modern-day Jesus. So, to my former cult members, please get help. It was 2016, around 4 a.m. in Shinjuku, Japan. I'm on a trip with my boys. Everyone is completely knocked out in the hotel room but me. It was like the 5th day in, but for whatever reason, sleeping seemed like an impossible task this night. I was bored yet wide awake. So I think to myself, I'm in the safest country ever. What can go wrong if I stepped out for a bit? I get ready and head out. The hotel we were booked in is in the middle of Kabukicho, the red light district. So now at this point, you might have a good indicator of where this is going. This was my first trip to Japan, so I had no idea of the reputation this district had. I'm walking around for a good minute, just looking for something interesting. Suddenly this Nigerian man jumps into my field of vision. I bumped into him before on my first night when my friends and I were headed to the hotel. He recognized me apparently. He kept asking if I wanted to buy a drink, or insisted that I should visit his bar. I tried shooing him off and told him I was busy, but the guy wouldn't stop following me. After 20 long, agonizing minutes of pestering, he then puts his arm over my shoulder like we're best buds, and proceeds to ask me to go to his bar again. Just one drink, he said. At this point I figured, why not? One drink wouldn't hurt. Maybe this guy just really needs the business. I was looking for something to do anyway, and at 4 a.m., this was the best I was gonna get. Regret and paranoia sank in the very second I walked into this bar. It was empty. No one was there besides a Filipino waitress who was not in the best shape. She was probably in her 40s and was scantily clad. He asked me what I wanted to drink. My fight or flight response was on, and in the moment, I couldn't figure out why. I instinctively avoid ordering an alcoholic drink, and I order oolong tea instead. It was 2,000 yen, which is roughly $20 US. It was also part of the policy to buy the waitress a drink as well. That's another 2,000 yen. After serving me, the Nigerian guy leaves the bar for some reason, says he'll be back. I calmed down a bit and started planning my exit before he returned. However, me being passive at the time and too nice, I get stuck in a conversation with the waitress. She was actually a cool person. I'm part Filipino, so we had something to relate with, and ended up talking about the family we have in the Philippines. Anyways, things ended up being okay. I cut the conversation short and politely made my leave. I walked down the narrow, steep staircase towards the open doorway that leads outside, and I found my Nigerian friend, with about 5 of his Nigerian friends. He didn't seem happy I was outside. His eyes widened. His anger and frustration was very subtle, but was still noticeable for me. I walked towards him and he walked towards me as he's about to re-enter the bar. It seemed as if he was about to reprimand his employee for not keeping his guest entertained. I smile and wish him a good night. He waves goodbye half-heartedly. I feel a strong burning glare from his friends as I walk past them. I do not make eye contact. I walk back and return to my hotel room safely. I feel faint and dizzy at this point, unusually so. I immediately suspect it was from the drink I ordered at the bar. I was safe though, so I didn't make much note of it. In the morning, I tell my friend about the incident. He facepalms and tells me that I got lucky. He said it was really stupid of me to walk in there in the first place. Apparently the two types of bars that include the one I walked into belong to the Yakuza. The Yakuza are known to hire Nigerians to lure tourists to their bars because they're not usually afraid to be aggressive with tourists, and according to reports, they spike drinks of lone tourists, extort money out of you or your belongings, force you to sign credit card bills as you're drugged out, and once they're done with you, they'll decide whether to beat you almost to death or not, and then dump you somewhere bloodied and half naked. I assume this is to meet the weekly quota. I was very lucky to leave that bar at the time I did. The most terrifying part of this for me is that if I stayed in that bar probably even a minute longer, I would have lost so much. I could have been horribly hurt, insanely in debt, or even worse. This happened when I was younger, right before I became a teenager. It was when we all found out that my uncle was having an affair. The adults all thought I was too young to understand, but I knew. That's terrible, right? Well, it gets worse. Things between him and his mistress went south, and we were confronted with the aftermath. Apparently, this wasn't his first affair. By the way, I want to point out that my uncle is my aunt's husband. Naturally, the family was so angry at him since we all loved my auntie. We held a kind of a kangaroo court at their house. They lived way out in the sticks in a really quiet and rural neighborhood. My role in this grubby little situation was to make sure their kids, both in elementary school, didn't hear a word. I was to take them far away from the area of conflict and just keep them occupied while the grown-ups talked it out. Luckily, they had a massive house. We just shut ourselves in another part of the house, a kind of summer house. I kept them occupied and we played some games. It really wouldn't have been nice for them to hear the fallout. The kangaroo court, which didn't start until the afternoon, went long into the night. And now that I believe I have adequately set the scene, let me tell you what happened next. My cousins needed to get to bed. I tucked them in and made sure they were all right. I think it was around midnight at this point. I went to bed soon after. I awoke in the dead of night for some reason. I was thirsty, or maybe I heard something. Either way, I went to the kitchen. On the way to the kitchen, I thought I heard another noise. I thought to myself, was someone else awake? I hoped it was either my mom or dad. I couldn't see anyone else out there, so I just grabbed a canned drink and headed back to the room. But just as I was about to leave, I heard that noise again. I managed to locate the area of the sound, and it was coming from the front door. They had a sliding door just in front of the main entrance, and I noticed that it was open a crack. I stopped dead in my tracks. I knew that the door was shut only a few moments ago. I was sure of it. So that noise I just heard must have been coming from the screen door sliding open. Despite the unease I felt in the pit of my stomach, I wanted the door shut, so I crept over to approach it with the intention of closing it. Then I saw something. I saw a black-gloved hand creep around the frame of the door. I felt my spine turn to ice. Soon after the hand, a black shoe shot through the gap at the base of the door. The owner of that shoe edged the sliding door further open to a gap of around 15 centimeters. I slowly and fearfully looked up, and I met the shadow of an intruder. A woman was peering around the edge of the door. When her eyes met mine, I felt her glare. I froze in my tracks, my limbs completely stiff. I saw her put her hand against the door and began pushing it open further. This caused me to break out in goosebumps. I couldn't believe how brazen she was, entering the house right before my eyes. I had to do something. My fight or flight instinct kicked in. I thought that if I didn't do something, there would be massive consequences, potentially fatal ones. I was very lucky to be holding a can of drink. I just hurled it as hard as I could at her glaring eyes. Terrifyingly, when it connected, she didn't make a sound. I expected a scream with the force I put into that blow, but no, she just silently backed out of the door. It was so creepy. Before I realized what I was doing, I had locked the door. I heard a chilling gasp from behind the door, and then silence. Knowing that the other members of the family were on the other side of the house, and the only way to them would be to go outside, I slept by the door to protect my cousins. The next morning I was awoken by the sound of my mother screaming. I opened the door, and sticking out of the screen door's lock was a pair of plier-like tools. There was some weird liquid around the lock too. My cousins woke up and they were visibly shaken. My mom asked me what happened, and I gave her a rundown of the creepy events of the night. I soon discovered that the would-be home intruder was none other than my uncle's mistress. Though I was praised for the defense of my cousins, the incident rocked me, and I kinda hate my uncle for putting us in that situation. This happened when I was 25. I'm a female and I'd been dating a guy for about a year. Things were going great, so he asked me to meet his parents. He invited me to have dinner at their family home. It was at his parents' house, where something unimaginable happened. My boyfriend was from the countryside and his family still lives there. From where I lived, it took about 3 hours to get there by car. When I finally got to meet them, my boyfriend's attitude towards me changed dramatically. It really surprised me. He was usually quite the gentleman, but in front of his parents he addressed me with such terms like you and oi. It was downright rude. He'd shout at me using these words like he was commanding me or something. He had never treated me like this before, but since I was in his parents' home, I just put up with it and gave him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, what else could I have done? I didn't want to make a scene and embarrass him. I could see where he got it from. His dad was throwing his weight around and bossing everyone around. His father shouted some command at his mom when she was doing something not quite to his liking, and it was pretty harsh. I looked over at her, and she just kept her head down. She did what she was told. It was like this was totally normal. His family were giving off some seriously suspicious vibes. I was starting to really regret coming. It was so awkward and intimidating. At dinner, his father stared at me and said, "When you get married, you will live here." It caught me off guard. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was a demand. I just focused on cutting up my food and waiting for my boyfriend to speak up for me, but he never did. So eventually I said, "Well, I haven't made any decisions about that yet." His father glared at me. He looked so angry and said, "If you marry my son, you'll live here. Understand?" He shouted at me, aghast. I stared at my boyfriend. He must have felt my eyes pleading with him for some sort of help or defense, but he was just as silent as his mother. It killed me when he looked at his father and just nodded. More to the point, my boyfriend had never mentioned marriage to me before, so I was totally shocked by this. And to be honest, our relationship had its rocky moments. They started speaking of specific dates for a wedding. The pressure was intensifying. Later after dinner, when I was alone with my boyfriend, I said, "Hey, I feel a bit sick. I want to go home. Something isn't quite right." He didn't say anything, so I decided to start gathering up my things to head home by myself. Just as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Are you running away?" he boomed. He had totally changed. It was like I didn't know him at all. He forced me back into his childhood bedroom. He overpowered me. He shut the door on me and locked it. I beat on the door and screamed for someone to let me out. I was making so much noise, there was no way that no one else in the house wouldn't have heard me. Things got worse when I realized that I'd left my phone on charge downstairs. I couldn't do anything. I was a prisoner. I was stunned. After a while, the door unlocked and my psycho boyfriend's mom entered the room. I was so pleased to see her. I thought she had come to my aid, but my hopes were dashed instantly when she handed me some papers. "Sign this," she said. It was a marriage certificate. "If you do, you can go," she said in a monotone voice. It was the real deal. "I won't sign that. I'll never marry him," I said. "You think you can escape, do you? Go on, try your best," she said to me. She asked me again to sign it, and I told her where to go. She got up and walked out of the room and locked the door again. I needed to stay calm. Sure, I was terrified, but I needed to keep my composure if I had a chance of getting out. I decided to wait until it was the dead of night. I turned all the lights off in the room and kept as still as possible. Before shutting off the lights, I figured the window would be my best and only option for escape. I would just have to deal with getting an injury if it happened. I opened the window and managed to climb down onto the porch roof silently. It was amazing. I walked all night to reach the train station. Fearing for my safety, I kept looking over my shoulder for that crazy mother and father. Days and weeks passed after this incident. I got email after email from my boyfriend. They all said things like, "You think that's the last of this? You really think you can get away? We will not forgive this." Because I was living on my own at the time, I was too terrified to go back to my apartment alone. I asked friends and relatives to let me stay with them. Pleaded, in fact. One friend who I lived quite far from, where I met my boyfriend, allowed me to stay with them, and I felt safer. With the help of a lawyer and a support group, I achieved what he told me was impossible. I escaped from him and his family. I hear from friends and neighbors from my old life. They say that they've seen him hanging around my old apartment and my old hangouts. Even though I live miles and miles away from him now, I am still worried he will find me or find a way to hurt my family. This happened when I was at high school. I belonged to a basketball club. I developed a huge crush on a senior at the club. We ended up getting very close. We'd often met together in private. On one of the days off of school, he called me. He asked if I wanted to come over and hang out. Of course, I was over the moon to be invited to his home. I asked him for the address right away. "I'm actually outside your house, so why don't you come out and I'll take you there." I went outside as quickly as I could. There was a car waiting outside my home. There was some weird guy I hadn't seen before, sat with my crush in the car. I got in the car and he spun around and said to me, "Let's go have some fun together." And with that, we pulled away. I wondered where the hell we were going or what we were going to do. As the car rumbled through the countryside roads, the car suddenly stopped and my crush blurted out, "I have something I really have to do. I'll be back as soon as I can." And then he left me. Oh my God, why are you leaving now? I thought. But I trusted in him to be right back, just as he said. I felt lost and confused, but I tried to enjoy the drive. After a while, the car stopped and we arrived at a house. I knew it wasn't my crush's, as the nameplate outside was different. The guy in the car then asked, "Why don't we go in and have a drink while we wait?" I felt obliged to accept his offer, since he was friends with my crush. When we got inside, something was wrong. I was getting a very bad vibe. Lots of my new acquaintances' friends were sat around a table. It really freaked me out. Why was I brought here, I wondered. The people there were being nice to me, though. Before long, night came. I had mentioned a few times my desire to go home before it got too late, yet no one batted an eyelid to this request. I really started to worry now, so I kept stating, I want to go home soon. I had an incoming call from my mom. One of the guys there went crazy at me when I excused myself to answer it. He snatched the phone out of my hand. This was no longer a friendly or normal situation. The man who took my phone told me that I wouldn't be going anywhere. I judged the situation as best as I could and came to the conclusion that I had been sold by my crush to these strange men. Perhaps they were some small-time yakuza or something. It seemed as if I would be spending the night here, or possibly longer. My heart ached and I just wanted to see my parents again. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. Before I knew it, I was bawling my eyes out. They put me in another room and told me to go to sleep. I tried to think on my feet. I opened the door as quietly as I could. I listened to the men's conversation. We will get a good price for her from the Koreans, one man said. The poor thing, another chimed in. No, it's fine, said another. I could not believe I was listening to them discussing my future. I pretended to sleep in bed. I couldn't do anything else. I resigned myself to my fate. I had to come to terms with the idea that I wouldn't see my parents or friends ever again. I tried to prepare psychologically for whatever would happen next. I saw the early light of morning. I needed the bathroom, so I opened the bedroom door and went in search. My heart was pounding. On the way, I bumped into one of those men. I don't want to do this, but if you try to escape or go somewhere I can't see you, then... He trailed off. I won't try and escape, I whimpered. I apologized from the bottom of my heart to my parents. My life in abduction went on this way for about a week, until one night I was forcibly woken from my sleep, dragged out to a car so violently by the man who picked me up originally. I was thrown in, the engine started, and we pulled away. I had no idea where we were headed. To the Koreans, I guessed. It was so hard for the last days and nights to escape reality. I couldn't even comfort myself with family memories, as it was just too painful. I was losing my mind. I was ready to die. I couldn't physically cry anymore. I was absent-mindedly gazing out of the passenger side window when I noticed familiar things from my neighborhood. Then the car pulled to a stop in front of my house. Go, the man said. I got out and he pulled away into the night. He must have felt some sympathy for me, or maybe his conscience kicked in. To this day, I have no idea what caused his change in heart. I was dumbstruck to be returning home safely. I went inside my family home, a place I thought only moments ago I'd never see again. My mother rushed downstairs. She must have heard me come in. She was so angry. Because I was young and stupid, I thought telling her about my abduction would get me into trouble or make her worry, so I just told her I'd been staying with a friend. She screamed at me for not getting in touch with her once during the last week. My mother still doesn't know what happened, and it's 10 years later. When I went back to school, I couldn't find a trace of that senior, my crush, who had gotten me into that mess. He must have left town before handing me over to those guys. It was a truly terrifying event, but I am very lucky to say that I'm very well these days, and that I live happily. This happened when a buddy and I were on our way to a ski resort. I was driving and my friend was co-pilot. He sat with the road atlas across his knees. This happened before sat-navs and smartphones. I remember every 5 minutes my friend was saying, "It's not much further now." I was kind of in a bad mood since the snow looked as if it was going to stop. My friend had the smart idea that if the snow was easing up, we could take a shortcut through a kind of country lane. "This is a complete failure," I said to him. "Nah, man, we're so close. I got a good feeling about this shortcut. It's fine," he replied. I wondered if this trip was going to be worth it or not. I thought of turning back because if there was no fresh snow, then skiing wouldn't be as fun, but I just couldn't pop a U-turn on the highway. So trying this mountain road gave me the chance to turn the car around if I needed it. I got on the mountain road and made sure I went slow and steady. The trees were dense and in full growth. This road was dark and basically a mud road. Some light, upbeat music was playing on the radio. It was in complete contrast to the two of us in the car. We weren't speaking. I wanted to get back on a main road, so I sped up a bit. Nothing but trees, no houses or anything. We were on this road for about an hour, when finally we saw some signs which showed that the mountain pass was coming up. It was at this point my friend said, "Hey, look at that. There's someone there." I saw a figure of a man stood by the side of the road. I slowed down a bit to see what was going on. The guy by the road started waving us over. He was smiling, and I guess he looked about 30 years old. I pulled the car over and the man approached. He knocked on the passenger side window of the car. I opened the window a tiny bit. "Ah, thank you for stopping. My car broke down. Do you think you could help me out?" he said. I didn't see a car, so I said nothing. My friend didn't say a word either. Something was off. The man tried to jam his fingers through the gap in the window. "Hey, open it." I hit the central lock just as he was trying the door. "Hey, come on, open it." His friendly rescue me persona melted away. He was angry and aggressively trying to get into my car. He kept rattling the door. "Open it," he urged. He pulled a huge hunting knife out. "Get out of the car, now." At that point, I hit the accelerator, and we peeled out of there, leaving the man running after us. So guys, always keep your wits about you, and stay safe out there. A year ago, I started working as an Uber driver. I work mostly at night, so I had a few weird encounters on my time as a driver, but one of them was particularly weird. Every day I started working at 8 p.m. and finishing maybe at 3 to 4 a.m. One day I was working near the suburbs of my city. It was 2 a.m. and I got a request for a passenger a few kilometers away from me. I took the route, and it took me to this isolated part of the suburban area. Usually this late at night, there's no one on the streets, of course, but this area was, well, it seemed, completely deserted. The houses were dark, not even lights on the patio or anything, no cars on the street. It felt so creepy. I had never been to that area before, so I was already feeling uncomfortable. I live in the north part of Mexico, so things are usually not that safe here. Anyway, I drove to the location of this guy, and he was standing in the corner of the street near a lamppost. I parked the car and he opened the door and got in. The guy had an oversized dark jacket. He was sweaty, he smelled weird, and he was kind of scared. He looked to the back seat and then to the other sides of the car, as if he was checking for something. I thought that was weird, but, well, I just went with it. I then proceeded to start the trip, and the app showed me the route. The location I was supposed to drop him in was in Mexico City, which is like 900 kilometers from my city. I asked the guy, "What is this?" The guy told me he pressed a random location to drop him off at, and that he lived nearby. He said, "Just a few blocks from here." His phone was dead, supposedly, and he was going to pay in cash. He didn't look at me at all, not even once. He seemed scared for some reason, as he was breathing fast and loud, but it was like he was trying to hide it. I started the car, and the guy was pointing at me where to go next. After a few blocks, I noticed we were just going in circles. I asked him what his deal was. He told me that his girlfriend left him earlier, and he suspected that she was with a guy nearby. I told him that wasn't my job and to get out of the car. He yelled at me to shut up. At this point, I started getting scared. It was already so late at night in a very isolated area. The guy was acting weird, and I just started to think he might even have a gun or a knife under his jacket or something. He wouldn't get out of the car when I told him to, so I just kept going. On the street, there was a person walking by. He was holding some grocery bags, and my passenger told me to stop the car. I did, and he told me to follow that guy. Obviously, the guy noticed we were following him, so this person started walking faster and went into a house. The next thing the weirdo tells me to do is stop in front of his house. He was staring through the windshield, not even at the guy's house. He just sat there in silence, breathing hard. I was so scared, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly the guy opens the door, and just before he gets out, he tells me not to leave. He exits. Then he turns around again and yells at me, "Don't leave." As soon as he steps away from the car, I close the door and leave as fast as I can. I was shaking. I called the cops and told them what happened and went straight home. I don't know what was wrong with this guy, but I felt he was planning to do something bad to that random guy. In 2010, I was living in Quincy, Massachusetts with my husband, new baby, and a roommate. It was a Saturday, so I was taking a much-needed break from the baby and went to run errands and had some alone time. My first stop was to the local Radio Shack to get a phone accessory. After my purchase, I walked out of Radio Shack deep in thought about my to-do list and enjoying being Sans baby, when a voice broke through my reverie. "Excuse me, miss. Can you help me, please?" I blinked in confusion and looked over at the man who addressed me. My first impression was Italian grandpa. Everything about him was beige, from his khaki slacks, brown cardigan, and tweed flat cap, to his sandy-colored mustache. Even the car he stood next to, a boat-sized town car, was a faded champagne. I hesitated, as being a believer in the golden rule, I generally try to help people out whenever I can. But this time, something about this situation gave me pause. I stood there in the middle of the parking lot. "What do you need?" I asked. He smiled warmly. "There's something wrong with my car." He held up a key fob. "When I click my car key, my car door's locks won't lock. It's very strange. Can you come over and take a look?" He gestured to his car and clicked the fob in demonstration. Still hesitating, I answered, "I don't know anything about cars, but we're right here at Radio Shack. Maybe they can help you." No, he said. "I think we can figure this out together. Come here and look." Again, I repeated that I don't think I could help him. I could see that he was getting agitated, yet he continued to smile. He walked over to the back of his car and opened the trunk. "But here's the strangest thing," he said. "The doors won't lock, but the trunk will." He started waving at me eagerly. "Come here and look at the trunk." I began to feel very confused. Part of me wanted to go over to help, yet greater instincts prevailed. I began to walk in the opposite direction to my car, repeating over and over again to the man, "I can't help you. Go into Radio Shack for help." As I walked away, I saw him throw his arms up in disgust, slam the trunk, get into his car, and drive away. I drove on to my next errand, feeling very unsettled, but as I tried to process the encounter, I began to have doubts about my reaction. Maybe he was just an old man who needed help. Did I do the right thing? When I returned home, I shared my encounter with my husband and roommate. I expected that they'd laugh and assure me I was being overly paranoid. Instead, they looked at me with wide eyes. "Jen," my husband said, "that guy was trying to kidnap you." I didn't report this incident to the police, as I didn't have any useful information regarding a license plate number. I didn't think a man asking for help with his car counted as harassment. I did always wonder what the man's true intentions were. On a lark, I decided to Google attempted kidnappings in Quincy, in hopes that my search would turn up empty, and this was truly an innocent, if awkward, encounter. Imagine my dismay when I pulled up this article. Quincy man accused of attempting to kidnap a woman. I immediately recognized the perpetrator as the man from the Radio Shack parking lot. The follow-up article revealed that he actually lived in my old neighborhood. I often wonder if I was one of his first attempts at kidnapping, and what would have happened to me if I'd gone over to look in his trunk. A while back, I went on a vacation to California. I was taking 2 to 3 Ubers per day, and usually made friendly small talk with the drivers. One driver picked me up, and by chance I'd asked him to take me to the In-N-Out a couple of blocks from my hotel, instead of the hotel itself. I was traveling alone. He asked me what I was doing in California. I told him I was on vacation. He then asked me who I came with. This made me feel instantly on edge. I felt like I should say my boyfriend or something. It felt like he was trying to gauge if I was traveling alone. I said family. He asked me where I was staying at. I pretended I didn't hear him. He then pushed it and asked again, and I said, "A hotel." He asked if it was near where he was dropping me off at. I said kinda. He then questioned me on how long I would be in town. "Oh, vacation length. Not too long," I said. I had no problem telling my drivers I was from out of town, but I hated the questions he was asking. They felt off. He wanted too much detail for small talk. He started texting while driving. I was looking over his shoulder. The text was not in English. I honestly couldn't tell what language it was, but I could see my pickup location typed out. After he dropped me off, I watched his car. He pulled around to the back of the parking lot and sat there. He didn't leave his car. I stayed at the In-N-Out for almost an hour. I considered calling an Uber, but I asked some random women if they had a car and if they could drive me. Eventually, I walked a couple of blocks to my hotel. I pretended to talk on the phone the entire time. Maybe I was overreacting. The reason I walked back was because I convinced myself I was being judgmental, and maybe he was just being friendly. But I had had plenty of friendly drivers that trip with no interest in sticking around an hour after dropping me off, or texting someone about my location. So for starters, I'm a white female who lives in the middle of nowhere in Japan. I stand out quite a bit. About 2 weeks ago, I decided to go watch a movie and get some shopping done, because it's very cold where I live and I only had summer clothes. Since the closest theater and mall is an hour away, I wanted to make the most of my trip and ended up seeing Joker at around 9 p.m. after I did some shopping. Everything up until after the movie was fine, and I had no problems. However, when I went to see the movie, I took notice of this one guy who sat directly behind me. I thought, whatever, because he probably just bought the seat behind me because he liked being in the back of the theater or something. Also, after movies in Japan, It's very common for everyone to stay seated until after the end of the credits, but because it was late and I had to drive back home, I didn't want to wait and I got up from my seat. As soon as I got up, the guy behind me got up too. We made weird eye contact and he just seemed a bit off, but I didn't think too much of it because it was late. After, I walked to the bathroom and the guy was walking slowly behind me. He stopped outside the bathroom and waited. He was all by himself. He watched me go in. Okay, now that was weird, I thought. So because I was a bit freaked out by this guy at this point, I decided to stay in the bathroom for a bit longer to see if he'd go away. But no, as soon as I walked out, I saw the guy was outside waiting for me. So 2 other women in the theater exited at that time too, so as a group, we all left and got on the same elevator. I also want to point out that this guy was wearing a very large trench coat, and that added to his creep factor. He was just staring at me while we were in the elevator, and as we were leaving through the entrance doors, I started to walk fast, and then I ran straight to my car. I turned to look at the guy, and he's just standing there at the entrance. He was watching me run to my car. As I was about to leave, I saw him wait in his car, and it was turned off. I think he was waiting for me. I decided to wait there too, and he didn't even move or turn his car on for about 5 minutes. I was freaked out at this point. I drove out of the lot as fast as I could, but as soon as I turned on my car, he had turned on his. Luckily, I was too fast for him to catch up, and I managed to get back home without him following. A couple of years back, I was without a car. I lived in what we consider the downtown area of Pensacola, Florida. Being that I didn't have a car, I frequently Ubered to and from work, and sometimes from bars downtown if it was late and I felt unsafe as a small lesbian walking home. I never really had a problem with any of my drivers until I met James. James was, I assume, from somewhere else because his English wasn't that good. He had picked me up to take me to work a few times, but I had a hard time understanding him. Our conversations were short and confusing. One of the times, instead of talking, he sang to me the name game. I have an unusual name, but it rhymes with Bailey, Haley, Kaylee, that kind of thing. So that happened, and it was okay. It was kind of funny, but it lasted the whole 20 minutes ride home. It got weird, and I didn't know what to say after a while. Fast forward maybe a few months later, I drank a few beers at a local dive bar, and it was time to walk home. I realized I was probably too drunk to walk, because who knows where my drunk mind would let me wander off to. So I called an Uber. Well, James turned up. He recognized me, and I climbed into the car. We proceeded to go to my house. I was only maybe 2 miles from my house. It's not a bad walk during the day, but, well, at night, hell no. Well, James decides that instead of going home, he wants to stop by and buy me a Whataburger, because I need food before I go home. Sweet, right? So instead, he now drives towards Whataburger. At that point, I'm so cool and happy with what's happening. Well, here comes Whataburger, and he drives past. I say to him, "Hey, that was it." He says, "Yeah, I know, but I forgot my wallet at my house, so we're gonna go there first." That's when I start to sober up. I tell him no, just take me home. Well, he doesn't stop at first. He argues that I should be nicer if he's doing me a favor, so I decide to get a bit more vocal. After all of that, he says fine, I'll turn around. He then said something in another language that I can only assume is bitch or whatever. I felt like I couldn't wait, so I hopped out at a red light. I just risked the walk home that would have been just 2 miles, but then became 4 miles because I'm down by the Whataburger. At the end, I did make it home safely, But sadly on my way home, the police stopped and searched me because I was out late in what they considered a bad neighborhood. They didn't care about the weird driver because nothing happened. So yeah, it's sorta creepy to me. So this was a few years ago at this point. I was 16 at the time. I called an Uber to head to this beach club my parents and I were a part of, from my house. The Uber driver picked me up and wouldn't stop talking to me about how he moved here from India. I didn't mind, and I talked with him during the ride to be polite. He kept going down weird roads. Looking back, I think it was to talk to me longer, but at the time he blamed it on his GPS. I was too afraid to call him out on it. When he finally got me to my destination, I said goodbye and left the car. Little did I know he would park the car at the place I asked him to drop me off at. He proceeded to follow me down the beach. People at the beach club saw him following me and said nothing. Looking back, it makes me scared to think of how easily he got away with this, even with how weird it must have looked. He found me on the beach and started talking to me. He wouldn't stop. He told me how pretty I was, and he was looking for a wife. I was too young and scared to feel like I could yell at him to go away. I just stood there, hoping someone would notice how weird this looked and how scared I was. Then he leaves and drives away. Later that night, I get notifications that he found me on Facebook and Instagram. He tried to add me as a friend. I deleted the app and blocked him. And since then, I only use Lyft. I tried finding a number to get him blocked from Uber, but there was no phone number to call. This happened when I was 14. At the time, AOL was in full swing, and I found a guy that said he lived near me. We messaged back and forth for a couple of days, and then he asked if we could hang out. Not during the day. No, he wanted to come over in the middle of the night. I stupidly gave him my real address. I was home. My parents are divorced, and at that point, I lived with my dad who worked the nights. For some reason, I just got this really bad anxious feeling when he said he was on his way. I turned off all the lights, locked all the doors and windows, and just sat in my living room peeking out of the curtains of my living room window. I see a car pull up, and this guy isn't 16 like he said. He's gotta be in his late 20s or early 30s. He knocks, and of course I'm not answering the fucking door. I'm scared shitless at this point. He then starts to knock louder. I still don't answer, and then he starts to pound on the door. I just sat there, frozen, and waited for him to leave. Thank God I listened to my instincts. Anytime you get that feeling, you should listen to it without question. This happened about a year ago, and some things have happened since to sort of help out to explain. I just moved from Portland, Oregon to a suburb of Portland. The main reason being more space, less homeless, a safer neighborhood, that kind of thing. So one night, shortly after myself and my girlfriend had moved to our new home, we went out late at night at probably 2 a.m. It was the weekend and we had been unboxing and arranging the house all day. Anyway, we went outside and sat at the curb by the street in front of our house. We did this because we were smoking a cigarette and it was a nice evening. There wasn't a street light directly where we were sitting, but there were some on either side a couple dozen feet or so. The point being, it was pretty dark in our exact location. Anyway, we're sitting there chatting about our home layout and blah blah blah, ripping away at our cigarettes. And all of a sudden, a car comes rolling down the street, very, very slowly. It's pretty odd since it is a quiet neighborhood and like 2 a.m., But whatever, we thought. Well, we thought wrong. The car stops directly in front of us. We're a bit weirded out at this point. Oh, and did I mention we had a few drinks? So I was just expecting someone to roll down the window and ask for directions. No, not even close. A Hispanic man in his 40s, dressed very nicely but wearing an insane amount of gold chains, gets out. He doesn't say anything. He gets out and walks to the front of his car, and then sits on the hood. He grabs a cigarette and starts smoking. He stares intensely at us. At this point, my girlfriend and my cigarettes are done. Without causing any alarm, I whisper to her to walk inside and lock the door. I remain seated. I eventually stand, but I keep eye contact with the man. She doesn't argue, which she normally would because she is like that. She goes inside and locks the doors. After about 5 minutes, and with neither me or the guy saying anything at all, I walk to the door of my house and unlock it with my keys going in. I lock it immediately after I'm inside. I watch the guy from outside the window. He drives off soon after I go inside. Since then, sheriff deputies and court summoners have shown up at our house, looking for the former tenant. Apparently, he was a pretty bad guy. He was also wanted, and our address was the only address they had for him. My only theory is the guy that night was looking for him too. He was surprised to see us, and not him. My husband and father are both farmers, and when they aren't in planting or harvest season, they're in hay season. Well, they've just begun cutting their waterways and fields a few weeks ago. Now they're on client fields and waterways. My husband is in charge of cutting the hay right now, while my dad has been flipping and balling. My husband Jay pulls into this field with his tractor and hay mower. The field is really just an old pasture at an abandoned farm that someone can't sell. The house is falling in, the barn has been gone a long time, and the only other thing that remains is the corn crib at the back of the property. The grass is really long, and he sees tracks from a vehicle leading up to the crib. He doesn't think much of it. Kids usually trespass on abandoned properties around here to drink. Jay starts cutting the field and is almost done when some debris from either the house or the corn crib is laying in the way. Just a big metal sheet, so he picks it up and decides to take it into the crib, where it's out of the way. Jay starts approaching this crib when this horrible smell starts wafting into his nostrils. As he approaches, it got a lot stronger, and by the time he slides the big old wooden door open, he's gagging and has to cover his nose and mouth with his shirt. He decides to just prop the metal piece against the building while he explores for the smell. He gets to the middle of the aisleway in the crib and sees dark goo seeping from the second level in the crib. He climbs up a few rings on the old wooden ladder to get a better view of where the goo was seeping from, and he sees a fresh blue tarp encompassed around something large. Flies and maggots were surrounding the goo seeping from the tarp. He turned and ran. He called the cops and they told him to leave after he gave his statement. We haven't heard anything back, and I doubt we will. He didn't sleep well last night, and I'm praying that whatever was under that tarp was not what we thought it was. We haven't seen anything in the paper so far either. So far, all we know is there was something dead laying in the second story of the corn crib at the old Cunningham home. I worked a few odd jobs in my life. My first job was a summer job at 16 during summer break at a dairy farm. I absolutely hated it there, and it made it harder for me to find the motivation to even try finding work again when the time came. I don't really remember how I was first referred to the job, but the following summer, I ended up working as an office assistant for a self-employed photographer. My parents knew her because she used to be a member of their church, and my sister attended her 4-H program when she had it. By that time, her health had begun to take a hit, as she claimed it was a mixture of things from chronic Lyme to fibromyalgia. I'd also been warned by my parents that she was a little off. She was very religious and claimed to have had real encounters with demons, even participated in a few exorcisms. I'm an atheist and a skeptic, so I never took her story seriously. Aside from the weird things she would tell me, she was mostly harmless, and working for her was not hard. The job basically required me to do a lot of data entry, as well as help prep her photos with some touching up, and the addition of her company watermark before uploading them to a site, where her customers could browse them, and then pick which ones they wanted to order. She primarily photographed horse events, and for the first several months, my job stayed in her living room, which was basically my office space at the time. Eventually, I was talked into tagging along at shows where she trained me as a photographer, and soon I was shooting at her events along with her. It was boring work, I won't lie. I'm not a horse person, but things didn't get weird until a year later, when I learned the hard way it was not her that I needed to worry about. She had 2 sons, one of whom was out of state. The other was in the military. The latter of the 2, a guy called Nate, I'd only heard small things about. He was somewhere on the autism spectrum, but she was never clear on what exactly his diagnosis was. When he finally returned home and I met him for the first time while working in her living room, he seemed like a nice guy, a bit odd, but not concerning really. He was obsessed with movies, and being a bit of a movie buff myself, whenever he would venture to the living room to strike up a conversation, it would almost always be about whatever movies we were into, or what ones we were excited to see. I should point out here that I was 18 by this point, and he was in his mid-30s. At some point he got it in his head that I was interested in him, though he never said anything directly to me. I had to find out about it from my parents. My mom worked as the secretary at the church, and Nate knew it. I can only guess my boss had told him. One afternoon, Nate showed up at my mom's desk and started gushing about me. He talked about how much fun I was, how he loved talking to me, how he was planning to take me to the movies and take me to his church, and all these other plans he had for me. My mom was beyond uncomfortable, as was the pastor who happened to overhear it. And when I got home that night, she had told me what had happened. She suggested I make sure not to lead him on. I was completely baffled because I'd not done anything. We'd never even discussed the possibility of doing anything together. I got even more uncomfortable around him when I overheard a conversation between himself and my boss in the next room. He was talking about his experiences in the Navy, while she was talking about the dangers of other religions. At one point, he had said in a completely serious tone, "If I had it my way, I'd just shoot and kill any of them I met. Problem solved." My boss simply laughed the comment off like it was nothing, but something in his tone creeped me out. I made an effort to acknowledge him less when he was around, and keeping the conversation short while stressing I had work to do. Eventually he got his own place and moved out of his parents' house, so I had figured the problem had solved itself. A couple of years later, I had moved out. My boss's company had closed, and I was working someplace new. I was friends with both my boss and Nate on Facebook, and around that time I was finally coming out as an atheist, something I couldn't do when I was still living at home. One night, my old boss messaged me, asking about a ring I had on my finger. It was a black ring with a white solid star in the middle of a black circle. Already knowing where she was going with this, I told her it was just a ring. She started accusing me of wearing a pentagram, and that I was promoting Satan. I tried several times to explain to her that not only was it not the symbol, but that also paganism has nothing to do with Satan anyway. but she refused to listen, so I just ignored her. It was typical behavior of her and not worth the argument. The next morning, I had a message from Nate telling me I needed to come to his church with him. I told him no, and the messages I received back from him gradually grew angrier and angrier. He went from asking to demanding I go with him. He told me I was lost and that I would not find the answers I needed by living the life I was. Eventually, he outright said he thought the fact I was wearing a pentagram was disgusting and that I was opening myself up for possession. Knowing there would be even less of a point in arguing with him than there was with his mother, I went ahead and blocked both him and her, deciding I was done with the both of them. Then he started showing up at my workplace. He would always search through the store until he found me, and then once he did, he would corner me and not stop talking to me no matter how many times I tried to dodge him or tell him I needed to get back to work. Eventually, the managers caught on and started intercepting him whenever he showed up. I wasn't making enough to pay the rent with that job, so I had to take up a second one. Within a week of working my second job, which was in a different town, he showed up there too. This time I told the managers outright who he was, and after that, every time he showed up, I was allowed to hide in the back room behind a locked door while they sped his order along and got him out. One of those many encounters, while I was hiding in the back, one of the managers was back there with me and putting employee time punches into the computer when the both of us heard Nate shout in our direction, "I know you remember me." That was the last straw for them, and they told him his business was no longer welcome there. He stopped showing up at my other job as well for a while, which was a relief. Fast forward to a few years later, I was getting used to not having to look over my shoulder every shift or check the parking lot for his truck, and one day he reappeared. He was browsing a section I was walking past when he stopped me and got this deer in headlights look. I made a beeline to the break room because just seeing him had made me scared. After that, he started showing up regularly. I would always find ways to dodge him and avoid him, but he would still eventually spot me and know I was still there. I was debating whether or not to tell the managers, because at this point, it had been a while since he'd done anything, and saying something just because I was nervous didn't feel right. Call me a coward or an idiot, but that was my thought process. What happened next made me regret not speaking up. It was bound to happen eventually, but one night he managed to catch me while I was at the customer service desk. He approached me and said hi. I immediately started to look for someone to signal over so I could make a break for it. But before I could say a word, he said something that made me feel sick. "How's your little girl doing? She's 3 now, right?" I looked at him, horrified. I had completely blocked him from all my social media. I had his number blocked. I was living at a new address, and I had not seen or spoken to his mother since she'd confronted me about my ring. I had not told either of them I was a parent now, or even that I was married. I was not friends with anyone who knew them, but he knew. "How's your husband doing too?" he asked when I didn't answer. "He's good. He's a good man," I said, trying to reinforce the idea that I was not available to him and that I had no desire to have anything to do with him. "Really? Where does he work?" At this point, I felt like I was going to pass out. Thankfully, another employee approached just to gather some reshelves, and I got the hell out of there. As I was leaving, he called out behind me, "I'll see you again. We'll talk. We'll go out and do something together. We will." I reported him to the managers, telling them everything about the encounter, including all the information he had on me and my family that he should not have. They were able to pull up his face on CCTV, and while I've not heard anything, I'm guessing one of them finally managed to approach him, because I haven't seen him since. This has been going on for 10 years, and I want it finally to be over. If he shows up again, I'm gonna call the police. I'm just hoping it never comes to that. I just want him to stop. I haven't seen him since the incident with my managers. I think he may have gotten scared, but it turned out one of my coworkers used to work with him too at a different job, and she also made a complaint about him to the managers. I don't know what they did with that information afterwards, but I know he hasn't shown up since. It sounds like they plan to call the cops if he sets foot in the store again. With 2 employee complaints of stalker-like behavior, they refuse to ignore that. I'm a 28-year-old female. I was in my first year as a physical therapist at a large hospital chain. Though I was inside the hospital, I worked in a small outpatient clinic where patients came to me for appointments and left. As the newest therapist, I was given the late shift from 9 to 7:30 that catered to those who needed therapy and also had to work during the day. We were usually pretty slow in the evening since most of our patients were retired seniors, so I was left alone after 5. Like any normal day, I had a new evaluation come in for shoulder pain, pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. He was a middle-aged man, good-looking, well-educated, and very polite. I did the evaluation and decided to see him twice a week for 6 weeks. I tried to assign him to my assistant, but he refused to be treated by him, stating he would only work with me. That was fine. He wanted later treatment time anyway, and my assistant went home before I did. Our first few weeks of treatments go by. He was so kind and charismatic. I started to look forward to treating him as we shared a lot of the same interests. He even started waiting for me to lock up and walking out to my car in the parking garage with me. I hated the parking garage, especially when it was dark out, so I welcomed him walking me to my car. At some point in our treatments, though, I noticed a shift in him. Our light small talk started to turn more flirty, from him anyway. I was happily married and not flirting back, but as any woman knows, some men can confuse our niceness with flirtation. He started making advances and asking me out to drinks after therapy. I politely declined and tried to circle back to talking about his therapy. He seemed agitated and started to become less and less compliant with exercises. He stopped talking as much as well. I could tell the mood had shifted. This day I decided it would be best not to walk with him to my car. I didn't tell him this at first, so he went out of the clinic and waited by the elevator for me to lock up. I wasn't sure what to do, and I couldn't call my partner as they were out of town on business. So I opened the door from the clinic to the hall where he was, and I told him I had paperwork to catch up on, and I would see him at his next appointment. He looked at me with such anger in his eyes, and started walking faster and faster back to the door I was at. Luckily, I was able to close the door and flip the lock before he made it. He pushed the handle, trying to get back in, and realizing it was locked, he stepped back. Of course, this door is essentially a giant window, and he could see me on the other side of it freaking out, but trying my best to conceal it. He told me to let him inside, and he could wait for me while I finished my notes. I said thank you, but I had a lot to do. He insisted, and I declined again. He pushed once again on the door, and when it didn't open, he turned around angrily and went back to the elevator. I was shaking and terrified he would come back, so I went to the private offices and locked that door as well. I grabbed a large dowel rod that wouldn't do much to him, but it made me feel a little better to have. At this point, I knew he couldn't leave as he knows where I park and what car I drive. He could be waiting for me down there. I called security for the hospital, and luckily one of the guards was doing his round close by. He said he would walk me to my car. We head out to my car, and I see my patient parked a few spots down from me inside of his car. When he sees me and the guard walking towards my car, he backs up and pulls away. I thank the guard and get into my car. I drive a few loops before going home to make sure I wasn't being followed. Luckily, I wasn't. The next day, I go to my boss and tell her what happened. She accuses me of being paranoid and says I need to continue treating him. I ask her about having another therapist stay late with me, and she says she will ask a few people, but not to get my hopes up, as nobody likes working the late shift. I work my normal day, dreading the next day, knowing that's when I'm scheduled to see him. That evening, I call my brother and ask him to come to the clinic when the patient was supposed to be here and wait in the waiting room. Thankfully, he agrees. The next day, it's time for this patient to come, and no one shows up. The patient was always early to his appointments, so I was very surprised. 15 minutes turns into 30, and he's still not arrived. I decided I waited long enough, and I locked up. My brother and I then left. The weekend comes and goes by, and by Monday I'm back at work. I had no messages from the patient about the no-show, and I had no plans to reach out to him, despite that being protocol. Lunchtime rolls around, and I decide to go to the hospital cafeteria to eat. There are TVs scattered all around. I sit in front of one playing the local news. I occasionally look up at it from my phone, and one of the times I do, I see a familiar face. My patient. He was in handcuffs being walked out of his house. The sound wasn't on, but they had his name up and why he was being arrested. He was being arrested under the suspicion of multiple murders. My jaw dropped to the floor. Now the TV had my full attention as 3 pictures of young white blonde women popped up on the screen as his apparent victims. Young, blonde white women, looking very similar to myself. It took me a while to fully grasp what I'd just seen. I went to my manager and told her what I saw. Apparently not believing me, she searched his name on Google, and sure enough, there were multiple articles and news clips talking about his arrest. She apologized to me for not listening when I expressed my concerns, and she told me I could leave early if I needed. I stayed the rest of my shift, but I told her I wouldn't work late anymore by myself. By the next shift, I had one of the therapy aides assigned to stay with me until we closed. I ended up transferring to a different part of the hospital that had better hours after a few months, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to get drinks with him, or if I'd continued walking to my car with him. I mean, I was only going to see him for a couple more weeks, so what was his plan? Was I his next target? He's still awaiting trial, last I checked, and hopefully will be convicted, so he will be locked away, far away from anyone else. During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I was extremely awkward. I just come out as gay. I didn't have any friends, and I was just generally kind of a big wad of social anxiety. Given that I didn't even have the social skills to make new friends, it's also not surprising that I had no dating experience. Miraculously, over the course of the summer after sophomore year, I just sort of outgrew the worst of my awkwardness. I lost some weight, had a lot more confidence in myself, and my self-esteem was a lot higher. I came back to school in August, and by October, I had a decent number of genuine friends, and I'd also gotten a lot more involved on campus. With my newfound confidence, I decided I'd finally download Grindr and see what it was like. For anyone who doesn't know, Grindr is a gay dating app. It's mostly used for finding sex and hookups. Despite my improvement in the social arena, I was still extremely naive and inexperienced when it came to dating and sex. I set up my Grindr profile with a nice picture of myself and a very brief bio. I got a lot of messages very quickly after my picture got approved. One guy who messaged me had a display name of Dad for Young, which should have been my first red flag, but I was oblivious. I should note that I look really young for my age. At the time, I was 21, but I was regularly asked by campus staff which middle or high school I was visiting from. I'm 23 now, and I still get asked if I want a kids menu if I go to a restaurant with my parents. It's bad. So, Dad for Young sends me a message that just says, "What's up?" I reply without looking at his profile first. I then look at his profile and notice he's 54. His only profile text says, "The younger, the better," and his only picture was a zoomed-in blurry picture of his hairy chest. So I was very much not interested. But given my inexperience, I thought ignoring him would be horribly rude, so I kept responding. I don't totally remember what we talked about in maybe the first 10 messages or so, but I do remember telling him I was very cute. I know I told him I was a student, but I never mentioned which college I went to. It's important to note that I went to a college in a major city, and there's a bunch of different colleges all within like 5 miles of each other, and a few more within 10 miles of those. Sort of like Tinder, Grindr works based off of your location, but much more precisely. If you're less than a mile or two away from someone who's online, it will display the distance in feet. I noticed that Dad for Young's profile said he was 25 miles away, which I thought was kind of far. Dad for Young started getting more sexual in his chats, and he asked me if I wanted to meet up. I felt bad flat out denying him since he'd been polite, so I told him I didn't want to meet up with him that day, but that we could keep chatting if he wanted. I figured that was that, and when I checked 20 minutes later, it said he was offline. About 30 minutes after that, I get another message from him. "Hey Chris, I got a wild hair and thought I'd take a nice drive out to Hunter College." He'd also sent a smiley face. I had not told him the name of my college, nor had I told him what part of town I was in. I looked at his profile and it said he was now 3 miles away. I started freaking out a bit and I didn't reply to his message, in the hopes that he'd just leave me alone. It's important to note that my college had a couple of different campus chunks separated by a few miles. I lived on the upperclassmen residential campus, which was about 2 miles from the main campus, where all the other student dorms and main buildings are. I felt like if he was going to try to find me, he'd go to the main campus first, and then maybe give up, since not many outside people know about the separate residential campus. 5 or 6 minutes later, I get another message that says something like, "No fun if you don't play along. What building are you in?" He had named the residential campus I was in. His profile now says he's a little over 2,500 feet away, and every time I reopen his profile, the distance would decrease. I was fully losing my shit at this point, since this guy had the ability to pinpoint my location. So I shut my blinds, turned off my light, and locked my window, the door to the apartment, and my bedroom door. My roommate was also out of town on some kind of retreat, so it was just me. The guy kept sending me messages every minute or so, saying things like, "I'm gonna find you. Here I come," and other supremely creepy shit like that. The distance was down to 310 feet. I was completely losing my mind and I didn't know what to do. So I just deleted my whole profile. Nothing else happened that night, though I was absolutely terrified he was gonna come knocking on my door. Fast forward to 3 days later, I decided to re-download Grindr after doing some more research and seeing that I can adjust the settings so that my exact location is not visible. When I logged on the first time with my remade profile, I adjusted some of the search filters until the results were specific enough to display Dad for Young's profile, which I promptly blocked. Later that evening, I get a message from someone with a display name that said, "We'll find you." It had the same gross profile picture as Dad for Young. My stomach sinks. He sent a flurry of messages that said, "You fucked up. Almost got police called on me because of you. I couldn't find you, so I had to go to the other dorms and find someone else. I said I was outside his dorm, and then he told me to leave and said he was calling the cops. I'm coming for you. Freaked out, I blocked him again, deleted my profile again, and then I deleted Grindr. I refused to re-download it or any dating apps for about a year after that, at which point I worked up the courage to try again. I've not heard from this nutjob since, thank God. A current harmless admirer just messaged me after a few months, and it got me thinking about my first, and hopefully last, legit stalker. This was years ago. I was probably grade 10 or 11 or so, and I just gotten my L, and I was learning to drive. I fancied myself an amateur photographer, so I was off by a creek one day, taking pictures of ducks or whatever. A guy wanders up to me and starts asking me questions about my camera. He looked to be only a few years older than me, but I could tell he was younger brain-wise, and I was more than happy to tell him all about my fancy new DSLR. The creek was by a bridge near my house, and as me and the guy were talking, my mom drives by and spots me. She tells me she's going to the corner store for snacks and asks if I want to get some driving practice in. I say yes, and while I'm hopping into the front seat, the guy gets into the back. My mom thinks he's a buddy since he doesn't look much older than me, so she says nothing and casually chats with him as we drive. When we get to the store, he goes off a few aisles to get chips, and I say to my mom, I have no fucking idea who this guy is. We aren't sure if he's violent or not, so my mom takes over driving. He hops into the car and she tells him that she'll drive him back to his house. No, I'll go wherever you guys go, he said. She makes up some lie about going to a family gathering out of town and drops him off where she found him. Our house was nearby, so she takes him off in the opposite direction, and we drive around for half an hour so he doesn't know where we live. When we do come back, he's nowhere to be found, so we go home. Fast forward a few days later, we're on our porch doing porch things, and I spot a guy standing at the end of the street. It's too far to see if it's the guy, but I mention it to my mom and we go inside. A week later, the same deal. We don't call the cops because we can't tell if it is the guy, but we do have a feeling. He's just standing there at the intersection, just standing. Fast forward a week or two more later and I'm at work. I get a call from my mother. Apparently the guy rang the bell and asked my grandmother if I was home. My grandmother, slightly ailed with early onset dementia, totally forgot about the creep and says no, I'm at work. She accidentally confirmed I was living there. He asks where I work, and thanks to that early onset dementia, she forgot the name but tells him a restaurant in the mall. Well, fuck. So I'm freaked out and telling my coworkers the story. One line cook grabs a newspaper and shows me the most wanted list. On it, I see the guy. He's wanted for violation of probation. The line cook says her husband went to jail with him for a bit, and that he's supposedly non-violent. He was in for fraud or some shit, though I was warned to be careful and get an escort to my car after the shift. We show the picture around to the staff, and they decide it's best for me to work in the kitchen that day, as my normal grill section is literally 2 feet from the door. Not even an hour goes by, and the guy comes in asking for me. Now keep in mind, my grandmother didn't even know where I worked, so he must have went around to every restaurant in the mall. Mine was tucked in a corner of a department store that normally only old people shop at, so I'm amazed he even knew it was there. Most people told me, that place doesn't have a restaurant, you must be mistaken, whenever I told them where I worked. So it was pretty hidden to those 65 and younger. My coworker tells him there's no one by that name, and he gets kind of irate and insists I have to work there. That must have been the last one he checked. My manager hears the kerfuffle and comes out threatening security and whatnot. He leaves, and I immediately call the Crime Stoppers number. He stopped by my house once more that day before I was on shift, and then I never saw or heard from him again. I still don't know if he gave up or if they caught him. I had only told Crime Stoppers that he had told me he lived in the area with his grandmother, so maybe that was enough information. When I was a teenager, about 14 to 15, I was in 9th grade and finally had a cell phone, one of those free Verizon phones that you had to wait until after 9 for free calls. I started dating a fellow freshman, but I was a young male teen, so I had other interests. I started receiving messages from a number I didn't recognize, but it was a local number as the area code was like mine. As the number texted me and let me know who they were, I thought maybe one of my friends were pranking me. It wasn't in their character to do such things. Our pranks were stupid, like nut taps and that. Even then, we barely pranked each other. The person texting me said their name was Aquaria. She sent a picture too. She wasn't the prettiest, but she was easy on the eyes, so I figured I'd entertain the conversation. She clearly knew my name, and some other things like where I went to school and my age. I didn't think anything of it, because school can be a place where your information is passed around like a piece of paper. Now here is where it got weird. The girl claimed she wanted to be my girlfriend, and that the girl I was dating wasn't right for me, and that she was the one. I'd already had one stalker during my school days, but it was slightly more annoying than serious, so I thought it was her. But some things didn't add up to make me truly believe it was her. Over the next couple of months, the texts died out as I stopped responding. It started to feel creepy for me. One day I was walking the railroad tracks and I got a message from the same girl again, but from a different number, saying they saw me walking on the railroad tracks. Now I'm starting to worry that someone's keeping a close eye on me. The messages stop as soon as they start. Enter the MySpace days where the girl sends me a friend request and messages me about wanting to date again. She never told me where she went to school or how old she was or anything other than her name. Still feeling weird, I decided to stop responding until my 10th grade year. I started receiving messages through text again, all times of the day and night. I didn't respond, and soon she stopped texting until the 11th grade, and I'm dating another girl I started dating the summer before. This time things got extra weird. She messaged my girlfriend and told her me and her were dating. She was leaving messages on my page people could see, and they got very disturbing. She was planning our whole life. My girlfriend calls me up thinking I was cheating, but I told her the situation, and I don't think she believed me. But she left it alone after I made some calls trying to prove I had a stalker, which kind of worked out. After that, I deleted her off my profile and managed to make it through my senior year without a single text. And to this day, I still have no idea who Aquaria is. She knew too much about me, like way too much. Where I hung out, my age, my name, the school I went to. It was almost as if she was lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. This just happened not too long ago. I was outside of my apartment walking my dog when this guy drove past us and waved at me with a smile on his face. So I smiled and waved back. A few seconds later, I look up and that same guy is driving past me again, but very slowly. He's staring at me the entire time, so I stared right back. As soon as I couldn't see his car anymore, I went straight to my door. When I opened my door, I heard someone yell out, "Bye." I turned and saw that same guy with his window rolled down. He was now on the road, staring at me again, waving. My dumbass waved back and booked it into my apartment and locked the door. Now this guy knows which apartment I live in, and I'm scared. Any advice would be great. I'm currently living in my SUV right now, and last night around 12 a.m., I parked in a Walmart parking lot to sleep. It was one of the worst days I've had in a long time, and I was absolutely exhausted. So when I got into the back of my SUV, I fell asleep right away, unfortunately forgetting to lock my doors. I've always been a very light sleeper, and I'm thankful I am, because somehow I woke up, turned around in my makeshift bed, to face whoever was now sitting in the driver's seat of my car, looking directly at me. This is where the story somehow gets kind of funny, because I was so tired and in such a daze, all I did was continue to shake my head back and forth and say, "No," while reaching across this person's lap and opening the door for them, and gesturing for them to leave. So to whoever was in my car with me last night, thank you for getting out and leaving without saying or doing anything else but walking away. But I do hope we never meet again. This event took place a few days ago, at around 2 p.m. I was at university. It's the first time something like this has happened to me. Between 2 exams, I had 1 hour free. I decided to study. I was in one of the campus buildings on the 2nd floor. There were benches and high tables, allowing me to work with my computer. There was already a man, about 50 years old, wearing a suit, sitting at one of the benches. I settled down, far enough from this person. After all, there was a lot of space. I start to take out my laptop when the guy calls me. "Miss, did you come out of a freezer?" When he said that to me, I was like, what the hell is he talking about? Seeing that I didn't understand why he was telling me this, he finally explained that he was telling me this in relation to the fact that despite the current heat wave and sunshine, I was white as an ass. Then he starts laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Quite uncomfortable, I just ignore him. I go back to my revision, hoping to send the message that I did not want to talk. About 5 minutes pass in silence. Then suddenly the man gets up, walks through the small corridor between the benches, and plants himself in front of me, leaning against the bench that was facing me. And there, he does the most frightening thing I've ever experienced in 21 years of life. He fixes on me, in silence, a big smile on his lips. He was there for 10 minutes. Very, very uncomfortable. I pretend I didn't notice him, pretending to answer a message on my phone and being immersed in my revisions. After those long 10 minutes, he finally goes back to his seat, and then he calls out to me again, laughing. "Did you notice me watching you?" Yeah, I fucking noticed. How could I not? I ended up telling him no, I'm studying. I'm not paying attention to what's going on around me. He laughs like it was funny. Then he gets up again and comes back to me to stare at me with that big, creepy smile. I ignore him again, starting to think that, yeah, I should go. Before I can make a move, he speaks to me again. "What's your dream?" At this point, I really was questioning this guy's sanity. What the hell was he asking me? At this point in the discussion, it wasn't fear or stress that I was feeling. No, it was irritation. I finally told him that right now, all I want is to be able to study in peace. He laughed again, as if he was amused by my irritation, and then he continued to stare at me for 5 long minutes. Finally, he goes back to his seat and puts his affairs away. Damn, I've never been so relieved to see someone put their stuff away. I was just praying he wouldn't put them away and come sit next to me. Luckily, he doesn't. No, he walks back right in front of me, still with his big creepy smile, and he says, "I have to go, but it's not finished. You seem to have an open mind." Then he walks away as if what he said was the most normal thing. Before he leaves, he looks back at me one last time. "Next time, you will answer all of my questions." What the hell did he mean? There will never be a next time. I've never been so uncomfortable with anyone, being stared at in total for about 15 minutes by a creepy, smiling guy. Yeah, no, I never want to experience that again. I'm fine, thanks. Hell, I hope I never encounter this guy at my university again. When I was in elementary school, about 11 or 12 years old, I was playing outside on my front lawn with my friend. It was summertime and we were playing with water balloons. My family and I were fairly new to this neighborhood, and it was definitely a safe neighborhood. All of the neighbors were middle-aged to elderly people. The area was quiet, calm, and safe. As my friend and I were throwing water balloons back and forth in my driveway, a caravan drove by and went up the hill. I thought nothing of it, but I looked up as quickly as it passed. My friend and I continued on with our games. About 5 minutes later, the van drove down the hill again. I noticed it again, but I thought nothing of it because past the top of the hill is a dead end. It's just a circle of houses, so people would turn around there a lot. We continue on, and once again this van drove past us, going back up the hill. This time I watched it from the very beginning of my street, all the way to when the man inside drove to the top of the hill. We made eye contact as he drove by, and he made a really strange face to me. He smiled and did a raise the roof type of gesture to me. The cycle of him going back and forth happened about 3 more times. By the 3rd time of him going up the hill, I grabbed my friend and brought us into my backyard. It was gated and he wouldn't be able to see us. That day happened and that was it. Over the course of 2 years, I saw that van maybe 3 to 4 times drive down my hill, but a woman was driving it. Nothing ever happened and I thought about that day often, but I let it go after a while. One night, I was probably 14 at the time. I was walking my little 7-pound dog. I saw a car drive by me, but ignored it. I wasn't on my street. I was 3 streets over from my house. The car drove past me again, and this time I looked up. I felt instant dread when I saw the same caravan with the same distinct license plate and the creepy man driving. I played it cool. I walked to the street closest to my street. I stood and waited on the sidewalk to see if he'd drive by again, and sure enough, he did. This time he drove by slower. I was standing there on my phone as my dog sniffed the ground. I wanted the guy in the van to think I was ignoring what he was doing, but I had a hawk eye on him, with 911 dialed and ready if I needed to press the call button. As the man was driving past me, I wanted to confirm that he was following me. I started walking up the street slowly. He picked up speed as I was walking. I waited 3 seconds, grabbed my dog, and ran in the opposite direction. It took him a minute, but he put his van in reverse. I turned the corner onto my street and jumped into a bush 4 houses away from mine. He drove past me twice, but never saw me. I waited in that bush for 10 minutes after I saw him leave my street. I booked it to my house and told my mom. My mom was friends with a detective at the time. She told him the story and he ran the license plate. The detective couldn't find anything on the license plates, and he said there were no matches. I never saw the van again until last year, but it was a woman driving. I still think of these incidents, and they still make me feel dread. Over the weekend, June 4th to 5th, me, my boyfriend, and 2 of his friends went on a road trip for this festival that was taking place about 7 hours away from my home. When we got there, we did what we came for, then went back to our hotel. Now, the hotel we got wasn't great. In fact, it wasn't even okay. It had 2 stars. Everything in the room was broken or rigged to break as soon as a gust of wind hit it, or it was visibly dirty. We were only staying there since it was a 5-minute drive from the event, so we thought, what's one night? Mind you, this is already a city in the top 25 most dangerous cities in the country. We decided to get back on the road at 5 a.m., so we hit the hay around 11:30 p.m. We get up, drive home, and carry on until the 6th, when my boyfriend's friend told him he saw a news report about a shooting that happened at 2:30 a.m. that morning. 5 were shot and 3 died. It was horrible. Fast forward a few more hours when my boyfriend's talking to the other friend. He told my boyfriend what sounded like thumping around 3-ish in the morning when he randomly woke up. He was asked how many he heard, and he said about 15 consecutive loud pops. He later, after being informed of what happened that night, came to the conclusion that it indeed sounded like gunshots. We haven't been able to find an article including an address of the shootings, but I don't believe for a second it was just a coincidence. We never called the authorities or anything. It could be nothing. I made a mistake of looking deeper into the incident and the victims. I feel absolutely sickened that something horrific happened. I won't go into any detail, but it was a heartbreaking tragedy. I've been in a sort of weird funk ever since. Back in my late teens in Dublin, Ireland, I used to head to a particular nightclub every single week and got to know most of the regulars. It got to the point I could sit at any table and know at least a few people. One night, I was introduced to a new woman that no one really knew very well, and I said hello, made very short and polite conversation, and then went about my time as normal, dancing and drinking. Nothing much of note happened during my time in the club. At the end of the night, I left a bit earlier than my friends because I lived really far away outside of the city. I got a taxi home and it was expensive. I got into bed and I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up in the morning, sunlight streaming into the room, and I immediately knew something was very wrong. Too much weight on the bed. I spun and looked down at the end of the room, and there, sat on the end of the bed, was the woman from the night before, staring at me wide-eyed with utter devotion and a weird smile. It was totally fucking horrible. I had no idea what to say, so I said nothing. I was so weirded out by her expression and the whole bizarre nature of the situation. I was dumbstruck. It wasn't a lustful look. It was a spooky, obsessive, insane look. I know for a lot of guys the idea of having some random woman appear in their bedroom might be a thrill, but this was nothing like that. It was scary, plain and simple. I got up, got dressed, summoned up a bit of courage, turned to her and said, "You're leaving, now," and essentially marched her out of the house, telling her that buses leave from the end of the road every half hour. She left without saying anything. From talking to friends and family, I pieced together what had happened. After I left the nightclub, she had tried to catch up to me, but instead she'd lost me. She went back, asked around until someone told her the rough area I lived in, got a taxi there, knocked on some random doors, waking up some of my neighbors, and one of them eventually told her where I lived. She then lied to my sister, saying that I'd been expecting her. My sister was pissed off at being woken up, but she had still let her in. From there, she got to my room and sat there for God knows how long, silently watching me. As it turns out, Almost nobody from the club knew her at all, but we all assumed someone else must have known her. What really spooks me is that if she had wanted to hurt me for whatever reason, she easily found her way right into my family house, right into my bedroom. I'm shuddering thinking of it. My husband and I purchased our home in July of 2015. It was a pre-sale, and from the contract portion to having the keys in our hands, it was about 5 to 6 months. We were dropping by a couple of times a week to check on the progress of the house. We met a few of the neighbors and familiarized ourselves with the area. Our house is the corner lot on a private road at the very end of the neighborhood. The entire neighborhood is a dead end, one way in, one way out. Prior to our house being here, it was a vacant lot, which means that people parked here as we live in a city and parking is regulated. It's dead quiet here and nothing ever happens. I'm the type of person who's very observant. My husband likes to say I'm the 80-year-old, get off my lawn type at the ripe old age of 28. I've never been good with names though. Like I said, parking is regulated, so people parking on the side of the house which parallels the main road isn't uncommon. It's 2-hour parking. At the time, my husband was working 12-hour shifts and was carpooling, so he was being picked up at around 4 in the morning. He had just left and I heard a vehicle pull up shortly after. I thought maybe he forgot something, so I peek out the window and I see a truck parked along the side of our house, facing the wrong direction. This wasn't his ride, and I hadn't ever seen this truck out here before. I figured maybe they were waiting to pick someone up for work and left it at that. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, they continued to sit there, engine off, engine on, engine off, engine on, headlights off, headlights on. The truck was not in park as I could see that their third brake light was on. It had also come and gone several times. If you're waiting for someone, why leave your engine on for an hour? Why drive back and forth? At this point, I was a little freaked out. It was approaching the time that I needed to leave for work, and I would have to drive right past this truck in order to leave the neighborhood. I didn't know what this person was doing, and I was afraid that maybe they were casing the houses in the neighborhood, or specifically. I texted my husband, and he told me that it was weird, and if I was worried that I should just call 911. I didn't want to be dramatic, so I got ready and left. I left the living room light and the TV on just in case. We have blinds over all of our windows, and there's no way to see in. As I leave, I see that the truck is no longer there. I'm relieved. As I'm almost at the end of the neighborhood, I see the truck in another driveway. Now I'm scared. What the fuck is this guy doing? As I drive past the truck, it turns around and heads back to our house. I thought, okay, if I'm going to call, I at least need the license plate number. So I turn around and get what I thought was the make of the truck and the license plate number. I then peel out. I was so scared that I was physically shaking and I stalled my car. As soon as I get out to the main road, I called 911 to report the suspicious activity. I gave the description and said I'd like to be contacted afterward about the outcome. The police station is 2 streets down, so I knew it would be quick. About 15 minutes later, as I'm pulling into work, I get a phone call from a police officer. He asks if I know a Mary. Nothing comes to mind. I'm bad with names to begin with, but I don't know a Mary. He asks if I'm familiar with the yellow house across the street. I say yes. He tells me that it's Mary's house, and the man in the truck is Mary's ex-boyfriend. They've been broken up for 3 years. I believe I said, I'm sorry, but what the fuck is he doing there then? He was watching the house. He'd been stalking her. She was not home at the time. The officer told him that his behavior was fucking creepy, and not to show up ever again. The officer filed a report and patrolled the neighborhood for a few weeks. Even though I didn't know Mary, and we'd only exchanged waves in passing, it was creepy as hell and she needed to know. I've never seen anyone so freaked out. Apparently it was not a mutual breakup. He was obsessive and had some dependency issues. She had blocked all communication, and this was the last straw in order for her to get a restraining order. For whatever reason, she was not granted one earlier. Because our house and street is newer, it doesn't always show up on maps or GPS, so we have to give people turn-by-turn directions. When I mapped out our house recently, sure enough, that truck is parked in front of Mary's house. So, Mary's stalker, don't let me catch you in my neighborhood. When my boyfriend and I lived with his grandparents a few years ago, my boyfriend worked early morning hours. He would leave the house around 4 a.m. One winter morning, while it was still pitch black out, my boyfriend kissed me goodbye and I went back to bed. A few minutes later, I heard continuous knocking at the front door. Immediately, I assumed it was him forgetting something, and being half asleep, I ran up the stairs from my room to open the door. But as soon as I reached for it, his grandmother called out to me from upstairs and said, "Don't open the door. That is not him." I froze and was too afraid to even peek through the front door window to see who it actually was. His grandma looked outside and said it was a man that had no jacket on. He then left our doorway and went on his way through the streets. His grandma told me she knew immediately that it wasn't my boyfriend, because if it were actually him, he would have opened the door with his house key. He wouldn't wake us this early in the morning. Not long after, a cop car cruised down our street with a light on, as if they were searching for someone. I was so terrified that I decided to sleep upstairs in the living room. Later on in the day, his grandma spoke to our neighbors and found out he was also pounding on everyone's doors on the same block. One of the neighbors a couple houses down is a huskier, taller guy. He said he talked to the stranger through the door, asking what he wants. The man said someone is looking for him, they want to shoot him, and that he needs to hide from them. I'm more on the petite side, and at the time I was 19. I can't imagine what would have happened had I opened the door for him, or if my boyfriend's grandmother wasn't there. I live in a town in Spain, so here goes my story. This happened a couple of years ago. It was winter, so it got dark very early, and because of the cold, my little brother had gotten sick. My mother had to take him to the doctor. For some context, I have to say that my house is very big and old, and although it is renovated, it's still huge for only 4 people. But anyway, my mother had to take my brother to the doctor, so my father and I were left home alone. I was studying in my room, which has only one wall separating the entrance to my house, and my study table, which means I hear anyone who walks in or leaves my house. We never left the door open, but that day we did because we thought my mother would be back quickly, and there was no one else on the street because it was late and cold. While I was studying, my father brushed his teeth in the bathroom. After a while, I heard someone pass by the entrance and turn the handle to go inside. At that moment, I thought my mother had arrived home already. I'd left my room to ask how everything had gone at the doctor and if my brother was better. But instead, I was met with a tall, very thin man who was rummaging through the drawers of a piece of furniture. I stayed petrified on that spot, looking at him without knowing what to do. But at that moment, my father passed by, who acted much faster than me. He grabbed the man by the arm and took him out into the street, yelling at him what he was doing in the house and to not come back. Immediately afterwards, he closed the door with all the bolts. Apparently my father had heard the door open and me coming out of my room, but then he didn't hear anything. No one talking, not even my mother, who always announces when she arrives. The worst thing about this is not thinking about what could have happened to us, but rather that a few weeks after this event, we began to hear the door handle turning. But since what happened, we always left the door locked, so someone was trying to get in. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were sound asleep in our bedroom. It was around 2:45 a.m. Our German Shepherd Duke started barking viciously. We've never heard him bark like this before, so we assumed something was amiss. I got up to check and see if something was up. I ended up spilling water on my nightstand. It took me 2 to 3 minutes to clean up the water, and I figured maybe Duke was simply barking at the rain. I went back to sleep, and a few minutes later, Duke starts again with a vicious bark. My wife starts freaking out and turns our lamp on. We sat in bed for a second, and then we heard someone trying our front door. We heard the screen door clicking into place after being shut. The front door was locked, so he had no way to get in. At this point, I'm freaked out, and so is my wife. From our bedroom, we can see a window in our kitchen that leads out front. My wife started staring at it intensely, and she tells me she can see a shadow moving back and forth. She said it was a dark silhouette walking up and down our front sidewalk. At this point, I'm getting scared, and when I get scared, I get angry. I get up and turn on our kitchen light in the hopes of spooking this stranger outside. You would think he would leave with our dog barking and the lights turning on. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I made a stupid mistake. I went to my garage and opened the garage door. I then realized I wasn't wearing shoes and went back to my living room to put them on. I wanted to go outside, find the disturbance and deal with it. Duke was with me the whole time, and when he suddenly turned and stared, running toward the door that connects to the garage, I knew I'd messed up. I turned and looked, and this guy was just standing in my kitchen, mud on his face. The guy smelled like shit. He was wearing relatively decent clothes and didn't appear homeless. As I started to approach him, it looked like he was trying to take his jacket and shoes off. It was very bizarre. I yelled at him, "Get the fuck out of my house." While Duke was jumping, growling, and barking at the guy, he took a step back and said something incomprehensible. I yelled, "It's 3 a.m. Get the fuck out of my house." And I shoved him. He sort of stumbled and made his way out of the house into the garage, and then he left. I shut the garage door and called the cops. The cops came and said there were a couple of drug addicts in the area, known to do things like this, except the guy didn't fit the description I had described. I haven't been able to sleep for a few days now. I don't know what this guy was after. Best case scenario, he was incredibly fucked up, and he had no idea what he was doing. Maybe he thought it was his house since he started taking his shoes and jacket off. From the door leading from the garage and into the house, there's glass. Where I was standing, he couldn't see me, but he could see my wife. It is possible he saw her alone and thought maybe she was by herself and came in. The guy wasn't aggressive toward me, but he was also bigger than me, about 6'2" and 210 pounds. Before you say it, I know I shouldn't have opened the garage. He obviously took it as an open invitation. I felt guilty about it since the time it happened. I figured barking dogs, lights on, garage opening, a normal burglar would just scram. My wife and I are incredibly lucky he wasn't armed or planned to do anything violent towards us. I just can't understand how anyone in their right mind would act the way he did. I live with my boyfriend in a small fourplex in a very small town. I work at 6 a.m. and wake up at about 4:30. About 2 weeks ago, during my morning routine, I noticed someone standing behind a dumpster 20 feet away. I know my apartment is the only one with lights on, and he's looking at my window, just watching for about 5 minutes, when I notice a dog with the man. I just wrote it off. Until today, that is. This morning I left for work as usual, stepped out the main door and scanned the area. All clear. I walk the 10 foot to my car, buckle up, and start my music. I back out of my spot, and when I shift to drive, I suddenly see a man with a bucket on his head, standing at the end of the walkway. He was within 3 feet of my car. We made eye contact and he pulled the bucket off of his head and stepped towards me. I panicked and floored it before he got closer. I'm honestly scared. I even told my boss that if I didn't show up or call, that I was in trouble. I feel so scared. I'm going to be carrying a can of wasp spray to my car every morning, at least until the pepper spray I ordered arrives. The police and my landlord have been contacted, as well as the neighbors. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Do me a favor and hit the like button and comment. Let me know what you thought of the video. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And hit the bell icon as well so you can stay notified whenever I release a new video. Now if you fancy checking out my channel memberships or Patreon or any of my social media, all my links can be found in the description below. And as usual, I want to thank my patrons and channel members for supporting the channel. So a huge thanks to Casey, Sarah C., Linda, Austin, Tegan, Chris and Donna, Cassie Fowler, Pretty Girl 215, Christy, B. Nick, Lil Smart, Do It, K, Something Edgy, Pretty Girl 215, Borderline Betty, Sarah C, Blazed Goddess, Christopher, Spider's Web, Ooh La La Andrea, Lady Drackard, Sue, Absinthe Alice, Rochelle, Astara Ray, Monique, Crafty Kel, Monica Levelace, Emma, Sean Gorman, Jennifer L, Skittles MM, Gabrielle, Seraphina Nightingale, Jennifer C, Misanthropia, Fluby, Ryan, Brenda, Rudy, Christina De La Rosa, Noosh, Lulu Rogers, Fire05, Linda, Shan, Jody, Sarah P, Kathleen Fenton, James Gargano, Gemma Allen, Alex, and Courtney Maxwell. I hope you guys enjoyed that and are doing well.